So I can leave now?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, no, we technically need you, so
Oh, you do?
please stay.
I've got value.
Yes, thank you.
Thank God.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order the March 19th, 2026 meeting of the City of Nashua Planning Board. Staff, could we please get a roll call?
Sure. Mayor Donchis, Bob Bollinger,
Here.
Adam Barley,
Here.
Maggie Harper, Scott Leclerc, Dan Hudson, Larry Hirsch,
Here.
Cameron Green, Patricia Klee,
Amber Morgan in lieu of Trish Clee.
Amber Morgan.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum. Next item on the agenda, approval of minutes from the March 5th, 2026 meeting. Has any member of the board had an opportunity to review the minutes and is willing to make a recommendation for their acceptance or acceptance with modifications? Mr. Hirsch, please.
Move to accept the minutes as written.
All right, thank you. Motion by Mr. Hirsch. Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Second by Mr. Zoller. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Abstentions?
Abstain.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda, communications. Scott or Connor, have we had any supplemental communications come in since we received our packets?
Yes, so since the packet came out Friday, we received comment letters for both cases from engineering, as well as a revised site plan or parking demonstration for the 264 Main Street, I'm sorry, 264 Main Dunstable Road case.
All right, thank you. And were those materials current as of, say, 5 o'clock this afternoon?
Yes.
On the website? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. All right, next item on the agenda, report of chair, committee, and liaison. I do not have anything to add at the moment. One administrative item perhaps directed to Sam. I know Larry had expressed earlier this year joining the Historic Commission as a liaison. I don't know administratively what needs to happen there, but Larry, if you're still...
I think it's done.
It is done? Okay, perfect. So,
Yes.
All right then, easy. Asked and answered, thank you. And Larry, thank you for volunteering for that supplemental duty. I know it's already a big commitment here, but we appreciate you going the extra mile.
It's the paint colors that are going to get it.
Well, thank you again, I appreciate it. All right, before we get into our meeting, regular cases that is, I'm going to briefly try to go through the planning board procedure. The procedure of the meeting is as follows. After the legal notice of each conditional special use permit, site plan, or subdivision plan is read by the chair, the board will determine if that application is complete and ready for the board to take jurisdiction. The public hearing will begin, at which time the applicant or representatives will be given time to present an overview and description of their project. The applicant shall speak to whether or not they agree with any recommended staff stipulations. The board will then have an opportunity to ask questions of the applicant or staff. The chair will then ask for testimony from the audience. First, anyone wishing to speak in opposition or with concern to the plan may speak. Please come forward to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. This would be the time to ask questions you may have regarding the plan. Next, public testimony will come from anyone wishing to speak in favor of the plan. The applicant will then be allowed a rebuttal period, at which time they shall speak to any issues or concerns raised by prior public testimony. After this is completed, the public hearing will end and the board will resume the public meeting. The board will deliberate and vote on the application before us. The board asks both sides to keep their remarks to the subject at hand and try not to repeat what has already been stated. Above all, the board wants to be fair to everyone and make the best possible decision based on the testimony provided and all applicable approval criteria. Thank you for your interest and courteous attention, and if I could kindly request that you turn off or silence your cell phones at this time. Thank you so much. All right, moving along in the agenda, if anyone here is for case located L. Shakespeare Road, that has been continued to April 2nd. That would lead us to our next case under new business, conditional use applications. Property located at 14A Broad Street, case A26-0015. Has any member of the board had an opportunity to review that application and is willing to make a motion regarding the board accepting jurisdiction of the application? Mr. Varley, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, as to case number 826-0015, I would make a motion that the application is complete and ready for the board to accept jurisdiction.
All right, thank you. Motion by Mr. Varley. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Zoller. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Board has jurisdiction. Is the applicant here, or anyone on behalf of the applicant? Certainly, sir. If you wouldn't mind, just coming right up, just introduce yourself, name and address for the record, and tell us a little bit about your proposal this evening.
It's William Bradford, 160 Lawrence Road, Salem, New Hampshire, and looking for a conditional approval of a drive-in school at 14A Broad Street.
All right. And this is an existing building?
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay. And briefly, and I guess to the best of your ability, would you be able to speak a little bit about the conditional use permit approval criteria, whether you think you comport with those, and maybe talk a little bit about hours of operation,
Sure.
things of that sort, and staff on site, things like that?
So I'm not changing anything, exterior, interior, basically just a classroom, tables and chairs. We're constricted to a lot of New Hampshire laws with driver education. Typically my hours of operation are 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. We can only have 2 hours of class per day and no more than 6 hours per week. So this location, we're going to be there no more than 6 hours per week. We're allowed to have 30 students per class. Typically parents don't stay. They drop their son or daughter and take off and come back. Occasionally you get some that hang out. Is there any other questions?
Will you be having any stored vehicles on site, or is it just classroom instruction?
Just classroom instruction. The instructors are able to take their vehicles home, so it'd be very rare that a vehicle would be sitting there for an extended period of time.
Okay. Just going through your application here, on the conditional use permit criteria, I guess without going into any great detail, would it be your testimony that you feel you comply with all the applicable conditional use
Yes.
permit criteria? Okay. Great. Questions from the board? Okay. All right, seeing none. Anyone in the public here to speak on this case, either for or against? Okay. And Connor and Scott, I'm guessing we don't have anyone on Zoom?
No.
Okay. All right. All right. One last chance for the board? No? All right. I'll close the public hearing. Thank you for your testimony. And please feel free to have a seat again. You're good.
Okay.
We're going to deliberate now, and
Sure.
We'll
I just
take-
had one question about the
Oh.
traffic report. I kind of reviewed what the requirements were, and I believe that we're under the 70 vehicles per day, per trip. Is it still required to do a traffic report?
I would imagine, my guess would be you probably are below that threshold. Typically, the TIR threshold worksheet is required, and I'm not aware of.
Just a two-page
Yeah.
document at the end.
You would not, for example, neither the board nor the engineering department is requesting that you do some comprehensive Broad Street corridor study.
Okay.
It's basically sort of a declarative statement, I would think in this case, more than anything else. And if you need assistance with that, I would imagine you can reach out to staff, either planning or engineering. I would go so far as to say in this particular case, it may be more of a formality, but yet still a required item for this particular case. But I would imagine it should not be perceived as a laborious effort in any way. And again, for a use I think is relatively benign from a traffic perspective, as this particular application would not be responsible for any other pre-existing conditions along Broad Street or anything like that. It's sort of to, I guess, get to the lowest common denominator. It's sort of a checklist item for completeness.
Okay.
I
Thank you
would
for the
also just add
clarification.
that it's also just to, for the engineering department to have current, I guess, data on all uses in the area and how they contribute to the volume of the corridors that they serve. So it's just kind of making sure that their numbers are up to date with new
Yeah,
uses
and
coming
again,
in.
it's, you're not being singled out specifically
No, I didn't think so.
individually or because of this type of use, but it is something that is required of all applications. And again, if you were to need assistance with clarification or exactly what's required, I'm sure staff would be very helpful in that regard.
All right, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So I will close the public hearing. We'll go into our public meeting. This one, I think seems, to me anyway, seems fairly straightforward. There's quite a wide array of businesses within that plaza and along that corridor. I don't see this as being very impactful from a traffic perspective. But obviously, it seems like otherwise, engineering reports or recommendations were pretty straightforward. We have seen the permit for the SOAR request. That's pretty typical, and again, as we spoke to, the TIR worksheet is pretty typical for these types of applications. But obviously, I'd like to hear from the board, see what other additional thoughts you may have on this one.
I would just add that having had 2 kids go through driver's ed in the last few years, I can say that there's very high demand for this, and so to have another provider, particularly one in Nashville, I think is valuable.
Thank you, Mr. Varley. Any further comments or discussion amongst the board at this time? All right. If that's the case, is anybody willing to make a motion regarding this application? Mr. Varley?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would be willing, and I'm just double checking, just confirming that we don't have any.
Yeah, I didn't see no
Any
waivers.
waivers?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to approve new business A26-0015, finding that it does meet the requirements or the approval criteria in section 190-133F, and that would be subject to one condition as stated in the staff report.
All right, thank you. Motion by Mr. Varley. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Hirsch. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. You're all set. Have a great evening. All right. Moving along. Next item on the agenda, also under new business conditional use applications. Case A26-0017, property located at 264 Main Dunstable Road. Has any other member of the board had an opportunity to review this application and is willing to make a motion regarding the board accepting jurisdiction over this case? Mr. Zoller, please.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make that motion regarding case A26-007, claiming that it is a complete application and ready for the board to take jurisdiction.
All right, thank you. Motion by Mr. Zoller. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Varley. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. The board has jurisdiction. Is anyone here on behalf of the applicant tonight that would like to present briefly and tell us a little bit? Certainly. Come right up to the microphone. And if you would, please, sir, just introduce yourself, name and address for the record, and
Good
tell
evening,
us
everybody.
a little bit
My
about
name
your
is Victor Chavarin. I live in Nashville, 85 Lane Home Drive.
All right. And can you tell us a little bit about your proposed restaurant, hours of operation, number of staff, things
So,
like that?
We're looking to operate from 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. So it's basically, depends, in winter we will change the hours, because it's a little bit tough.
Understood. Out of curiosity, what type of food did you expect to serve?
It's Mexican.
Mexican food?
Mexican food, yeah. We have a restaurant right now in 494 M Street. Yeah, the name is Baja Tacos y Burritos.
Okay.
Yes, so we're looking for something to move closer,
All right.
to my house. Yeah.
Understood. And having briefly read through your application, specifically with regard to meeting the conditional use permit requirements, would it be your testimony that you comply with all the applicable conditional use permit requirements in terms of property devaluation, traffic and pedestrian safety? Do you feel this would be contrary to those or in alignment with those?
So for traffic, I think, I live in the area, but, I don't see a lot of traffic, Most of the traffic goes more to the Dunkin' Donuts area, but in the little section, it's basically, it's normal, what I see right now.
Okay. Appreciate that. And just in terms of conditions that were offered by the city, have you had an opportunity to review the letter from the engineering department? I can try to briefly just read it back to you. They're looking for a modification of the SOAR permit, which is a pretty standard condition, very analogous to the application we just saw, actually. And if you have any questions or need further guidance on what's required, I'm sure staff, either planning and engineering, could assist with that. Again, similar to the prior application, engineering has asked for a brief traffic letter to be provided, and again, I'm sure staff can provide some guidance on exactly what would be needed there. And I think the last note here, I just want to read it verbatim so I don't get it wrong. We note that clients for this and abutting property locations have been parking in the public right-of-way for more than 20 years. However, we have not found recorded agreements or easements permitting this parking. So I think that's more of a note for awareness. Connor, did you have any other insight on that? Is that a restrictive element of this, or is it just something to note for the record?
It was a note for the record, and in reviewing this application, we, I guess, were reintroduced to the situation on site where there is a public, or there's parking in public right-of-way, but there is no formal arrangement with the city and property owners or businesses to use that for their required parking. So we just need to make sure that there was adequate parking on their property. And in my staff report, I detailed as such.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Adam.
Just to follow up, I see that there's the diagram that's attached to this, I guess it's technically attached to the letter from Joe Mandola. What is where are we saying is the part, you're saying everything within that red box that's designated as a parking spot is in the right of way, or where is it? I guess I'm not clear.
So it would be the parking along Main Dunstable Road, if you're looking at the screen, the TV screen, with my mouse. This is public this is parking in public right-of-way.
Okay,
And so I think you just highlighted the parcel.
got it. Okay, I was just confused with the red box then.
Yeah, and I can only guess that might be a legacy of when Main Dunstable used to run across what is now the Everett Turnpike, and that was never quite.
Discontinued?
Yeah, so it's not a fault of yours, sir. There's some legacy parking quirks associated with that site. And again, but I think otherwise, if I'm reading the materials correctly, otherwise the parking requirements are met, and this would be compatible otherwise based on that. So it would be interesting to know. Again, it's not on you to demonstrate this, but perhaps a little bit of legwork in the future is perhaps resolving that, or trying to get some recorded documentation as to just if the property were to sell, or if there were to be some other, major sort of redevelopment, exactly what would be entailed there. But again, sir, it's coincidental to your application, but not something that you're expected to rectify if you otherwise meet all the parking requirements. So, all right. While you're here, other questions from the board at this time? Okay, all right. Let's see. Is anyone in the audience here to speak on this application, either for or against? No? Okay, all right. Well, one last chance for the board? No, seeing none? All right. Well, thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it. Feel free to take a seat. I'm going to close the public hearing. We'll go into our public meeting, and we'll deliberate, okay? Oh, thank you. All right. I personally don't have any real issues with this. I think folks that have been around for a while know there was previously a Dunkin' Donuts on that site, not in this exact unit, but it's had a number of uses over the year, that end unit, the dry cleaner, and Maine Dunstable Video, way back before that, for when you used to have to go to a store to rent your videos. I think it would otherwise be a good complement to that plaza, personally. But obviously, again, I'd love to hear back from the board, hear additional thoughts on the matter. Mr. Zoller, please.
Mr. Chairman, just looking at that diagram, I don't think you can really fault anyone for parking at that area that is, in the right-of-way. It's striped as such for parking. It's got the same access that, the rest of the businesses have there. I mean, it's not necessarily anyone's at fault for that. It's set up for parking currently. Just something to know.
I've been going to or familiar with that plaza for several decades, and not once on me did I ever know that was actually public right-of-way. But again, to your point, Mr. Zoll, I would agree. I don't think it's incumbent essentially on this particular applicant to try to rectify that. But no, I appreciate your thoughts on that. Other comments or thoughts from the board? Mr. Varley.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, not necessarily particular to this application, but it just struck me in reviewing this that we're, considering a conditional use permit for a restaurant, and this is in the local business zone. So I was just surprised that this wouldn't be a use that's by right in the local business zone, and given that we're, anticipating having a discussion presentation on the code update later in the meeting, I was just wondering if this is the type of thing that could potentially be considered in that process.
Yes.
Good question, Adam. Thank you. All right. Well, if there's no further discussion, is any member of the board at a point where they might be willing to make a motion regarding this application? Mr. Varley, please.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion to approve new business A26-0017, and that would be a finding that it meets the approval criteria in section 190-133F, and that includes 3 subsequent conditions, all as noted in the staff report.
All right, thank you. Motion by Mr. Varley. Is there a second?
I'll second that
Second by Mr. Zoller. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you for your time this evening. Have a great night. Thank you. All right. Moving along.
See if that was prior.
New business subdivision plans, we have none. New business site plans, all cases have been postponed to April 2nd. So our next item would be review of the tentative agenda. Is any member of the board an opportunity? Mr. Varley, please, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, having reviewed the tentative agenda, I would make a motion that there are no proposals of regional impact.
All right, thank you. Motion by Mr. Varley. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Hirsch. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. All right. Next item on the agenda, discussion items. The moment we've all been waiting for, recode presentation updates. Sam, I imagine you're going to run the show here?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
The floor is yours. Take a moment to get set up, and we're all ears.
All right, well, thank you for granting me the opportunity to provide an update. It has been some time since we've done a code presentation before the planning board. My apologies for such a delay. We went back with principal and we wrote code for quite some time. We had a lot of feedback to ponder. And this presentation is going to serve kind of as a refresher of the general structure, some of the big changes, what's different about this code compared to our current code. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some policy questions. As I was saying, we did a lot of writing, and the code is basically, is there, right? We have basically everything we need in it, but now we are looking to this board, we're looking to PEDC on where to draw some of the lines, how to treat some of the thresholds and where to define those. While we can take our best guess and make recommendations at where those lines should be drawn, we want to confirm that with representatives of the community and people who are very in the know in terms of local land use decisions and goings on in the community, that they reflect trends that you're seeing and the general community aspirations for the city. So with that, we can jump right in. So not easy to read from your perspective, so I'll kind of read through these. This is just listing some major changes in the current code. Actually, we'll start with what's going on in Recode. We're introducing form standards. So basically, standards around building, form, massing, architectural standards. We do have some in our current code, pretty limited to downtown. They're somewhat vague. These are very explicit, but they're also representative of the patterns on the ground. Our consultant went out, they measured buildings. There was a lot of windshield surveys, but also Google Earth, Google Street View surveys, and actually measuring window widths. So calibrated standards. Those calibrated standards are also represented in our districts. So you'll see a snippet of the zoning map shortly, and we will see how granular that is. But this is to reflect patterns on the ground again, but at a more macro scale. We have currently mass nonconformity throughout the city. You could not build many of the neighborhoods today in their current form under current regulations. And it's not a reflective of the neighborhoods being wrong or poorly designed. It's just the code was written in a way that did not honor the existing patterns on the ground. We also have targeted redevelopment areas. These were articulated in the Imagine Nashua Master Plan. So now we are turning that into regulation to really try and manifest that vision. We also talk about some more calibrated IZ, inclusionary zoning standards and incentives. So right now we do have those. They're a little stale. The market has changed significantly. We also have some issues with density. We have a lot of districts where we are allowing multifamily, but we have no density standards. So what good is a density bonus when you have no standards for it? We also talk a little bit about public realm standards, so where that relationship between public and private, right around the property line, begins to blend. We're providing guidance. We do have those a little bit right now, but again, limited to downtown. And also, we talk about parking. We see parking a lot here. We do get some parking waivers on occasion, but now we actually want to make sure that any relief being granted is really earned. And this is a conversation we're having with our parking department about what meaningful steps can a developer take in terms of their design, amenities that they provide on site for either the residences or the businesses and the customers, to make real strides towards reducing the parking demand of that apartment or that business. And then we have a far more robust method of approaching landscaping, and that's the green score. And we can have, we'll keep these in mind if we go through the presentation and we talk about potential things that we could talk about at a later date. These are all things that we could expand on. So moving on, this is a helpful visual in terms of kind of a nesting doll approach. So up at the top there, just a square within a square, that represents buildable area. This is really kind of setting that box for how a building can relate to the street, relate to the lot. This is what begins to establish a pattern within the neighborhood. And then the next box down, if you can see my cursor, this is just building standards, basic massing standards, height, width, length of buildings. And then as we get a little bit more detailed, we talk about component standards. So these are attachments to buildings. They can be side wings, rear wings, porches, dormers, all sorts of things that begin to give a building character. And then we get into architectural standards, so that's glazing percentages, the amount of windows you have to have on a building, roof types, and the pitch of those roofs. All different roof styles have very characteristic dimensions, and we're just writing what those dimensions are, and there's usually ranges, and those are incorporated as well, again, based on existing patterns. And then we also do talk about accessory standards, so location of accessory buildings, and form standards to go along with those. So to kind of illustrate that a bit further, this is just a sheet from the code. This is our small apartment building. You will see a lot of standards on here. The highlighted standards, those are basically the building standards. So these are, again, what regulates the massing of the building on the lot. The next little bit highlighted there, those would be the architectural standards. So you can see, percentage of first floor fenestration, upper floor fenestration, limitations on blank walls. But then we also have standards for massing components. So details around how large and how the attachments, these side wings, these rear wings, should be relative to the main massing of the structure. And those also get even more detailed with some of the more architectural standards around how to do a cross gable correctly. Again, all of these standards are calibrated based on surveys that were done in the existing housing stock in Nashua. And then to go a little bit more high level, this is a cut sheet from our urban residential district. So these are the standards that govern kind of the more district standards that you'd be typically seeing in our current code, specifically lot dimensions. That begins to set up that pattern at the block scale. And then also a table of permitted building types. So that's that relationship with that previous slide. We have building types. We have almost 30 different building types, and then there are appropriate building types for each district, and so that helps to further define the character within the district based on what building types are there presently. So we had mentioned that we have some target redevelopment areas. This is actually a sheet from the master plan, so those areas in yellow were identified as areas that should be either redeveloped or kind of doubled down on in terms of growth and character development. So we took those and we kind of drew slightly larger blocks around them to kind of serve as the base focus area of the code, and expanded that so that that darker teal is really where you'll see changes in the code. Everywhere outside of that, so North Nashua, the southwest quadrant, those areas are very stable. There's a really set character there. We don't see these areas of the city as real opportunities for growth, and quite frankly, if we really tried to force a lot of change through regulations, I think we would see a lot of pushback. So we chose to focus on the areas, we took our direction from the master plan as where to focus our efforts. And so this is a shot of our current zoning map. And you can see, based on the colors, fairly large blocks of color. And when you look at the proposed map, it's far more granular. And this is a reflection of the very dynamic neighborhoods we have in Nashua where character changes pretty frequently. And we wanted to make sure that we were writing our districts in a way that captured that character and really made sure that the districts were representative of patterns, and when those patterns change, you see a new district line. This is all to say that we want to continue to perpetuate the character that's there. We want to bring that character into conformity so that it literally can be perpetuated. But then when we get into those targeted areas for growth, we have a mechanism for that. And those are our redevelopment overlays. So in these districts, this is a pretty dynamic tool, and I think one of the really exciting pieces of the code that will allow us to really unlock growth in these areas. Key thing here is that opting into the overlay is totally voluntary. You do not have to do it, but if you do it, it unlocks some pretty powerful tools. Specifically, it allows access to higher intensity districts. So basically, rather than going through a rezoning process, an applicant with a fair amount of land, think of a large box retail store that may have anywhere from 8 to 20 acres of land. That turns over, it's a redevelopment opportunity. With that amount of land, there's some master planning that goes on. And rather than just saying, well, this is your district, we say, hey, look, we understand that there's a lot of land here. We want to see some dynamism between different buildings on the site. It's not appropriate to zone it as a single district. There's an opportunity to do multiple districts and create a new regulating plan for that single lot. So in exchange for that, though, there's an ask for affordable housing, a certain percentage of affordable units at different AMI tiers. There's, again, that master planning component of understanding how the whole site is going to build out, phasing associated with that, and certain site and building performance standards as well. And it applies to those areas that you see in different colors in that aerial map. And do feel free to interrupt me at any time with questions. I know I'm throwing a lot pretty fast.
Yep.
So just like a broad conceptual question, I know when you talked about the form standards, you mentioned a couple times that it's based sort of on what's on the ground now, and the reality of a lot of non-conforming uses. So I gather that part of the objective is to say we're going to basically align the new standards with what's on the ground, so that if you wanted to propose something sort of consistent with what's there, the zoning would then align with that, right? I guess, appreciating that some inconsistencies between what's on the ground and the code are probably things we'd say, hey, we don't necessarily want to, maintain that non-conformity going forward. So just like big picture, what would you say is the balance between preserving the on the ground, but also recognizing that there are adaptations that we want to have in the code that are improvements over what's there? So like, what is and I know that's a kind of a vague question, but like, can you speak to like what that balance is?
Sure. So the regulations, they're not prescribing something very specific. It may sound that way when we talk about form standards as, this is how you do your windows. I mean, yes, it has those standards, but the intent isn't to be that granular. Everything has a range, right? Right now, everything has a range. You walk through a neighborhood, not everything is the same, especially in the older neighborhoods that have grown organically over time. And that represents some of the most interesting places to walk, simply because the streetscape, the block phase, everything around you is varied, right? So the idea with bringing forward form standards that are reflective of that dynamic streetscape is to recognize those patterns, make sure that they're conforming so that those lots can add a deck or, you know, add an addition in a way that, you know, would not kick them to the zoning board for some crazy variance because they're already non-conforming. But then also, as other neighborhoods mature and thicken up over time, it's recognizing, you know, what is that next reasonable increment of growth that we want to allow, and using the form standards that we've observed to help guide that, so that property owners, they have reasonable expectations and it's a predictable process, but also abutters and people who see development going on or are concerned, they can have a reasonable expectation of the bounds of what that would be. You know, without, you know, once you go to the zoning board and you're asking for something that's outside of the norm, it's a very common thing right now. In fact, I think that if anyone keeps their eye on the zoning board agendas, the zoning board agendas are longer than our planning board agendas. There's more people trying to change or break the rules, if you will, simply because the rules are just not reflective of what's going on right now.
So is it fair to say like it's a greater degree of flexibility within a broader standard?
It is, in that flexibility and that standard, I'm hesitant to say the word narrowed, but it's more focused on the patterns that are there.
Yeah.
So rather than being silent on it, whereas, you know, you go to the extreme, you say, here's the historic district, and we're very, very cognizant of what is going on, and rightfully so, because that has its own value, right? You know, again, it goes back to the predictability for everyone involved in the process.
Yeah, and I think the corollary you sort of touched on is it's not, the intent here is not to create conformity in the sense of everything looks the same.
Right.
It's to provide a degree of greater flexibility and sort of create more certainty, sort of like with the bounds within which you're permitted to operate.
When something redevelops, we don't want people to say, wow, that's way out of character with the area.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to avoid.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. So that was my general refresher. There's a lot in there, but I'm happy to jump into some policy questions that will likely kind of drum up some other elements of the code that you may have further questions on. So getting into that, our first one relates to the commercial industry district. So the master plan, the Imagine Nashua plan, I'm gonna focus this really on Northeastern Boulevard because the master plan talked about Northeastern Boulevard as a commercial and industrial center, and it said double down on that. You know, we need to maintain commercial and industrial areas in the city. We don't want to see all of those areas redeveloped into housing or mixed use. We need true commercial and industrial areas in the city. That said, it also said that we need to make Northeastern Boulevard and that neighborhood more walkable. And at PEDC on Tuesday night, we heard that from some of the aldermen who said, yes, please do that. So it almost seems like we have competing interests where, you know, we're going to have loading bays, we're going to have, you know, larger trucks, but we also want to make it more walkable. And how do you do that? You do it through form standards and building placement and you know, how we talk about that streetscape. We currently do that already a little bit. Right now, we require that all loading is done at the side or the rear of a building rather than the front, and that that loading is not facing a public street. We also talk about linkage of sidewalk networks to ensure that buildings are linked to sidewalks and that sidewalk is continued, but also a little bit about like citing the parking behind buildings is encouraged. While not a formal standard, we prefer to see that as you know, lot geometry is allowed. So the question is, is that something that we want to try to bring forward, which means that we would need to see stronger form standards in the commercial industrial district. So this slide kind of begins to talk about what is that? What are stronger form standards? So the first box on the top left, these would be primary building placement. In comparison to our current code, you know, these setbacks are very favorable, right? You know, 0 front setback, 0 secondary front setback, so primary street to secondary street, the secondary street being like the lower order street, you know. But then also side setbacks range from 0 to 10 feet based on say you're abutting a residential district, there actually is a setback. The idea being there is that we're giving more land on a lot to be developed, but bring the building forward, bring it towards the sidewalk, so that as a pedestrian, you're walking next to a building and landscaping rather than an open parking lot. So that's the idea there, is there's a little bit of a trade-off. You can develop more of your land, but just bring the building forward, so again, that you can site the loading and the parking behind the building. You can see another cut sheet from the building standard, and this being our box building. Very flexible building type, one that you would typically see in commercial development. It could be a Walmart, a Home Depot, it could be a logistics center. Very flexible building type. But we have form standards around that. This talks about a building width of 400 feet. That seems small if you do need to do a large facility. However, it talks about attachments. Attachments being you could put 2 of these, 3 of these together. You could string them along and get a much larger building. The ask is, though, when you look at the building, make it look like 2 or 3 different buildings rather than one giant facade. Again, that benefits the pedestrian, the neighbors. Is that something that we would want to impose on these building types? This is an important building because of its flexibility. It becomes a ubiquitous tool in these districts. So it's just a question of do we want to ask for more for the benefit of a public in a district that is very focused on commercial and industry, but also a nod towards what the master plan was talking about.
Sam, in regards to the 0-foot front yard setbacks, is there anything in regards to a landscape buffer, any consideration there? You know, how do those two jive with each other if the aim is to have more of a landscape frontage with a 0-foot setback?
Yeah, so that gets into some of our site standards and public realm standards. So typically when we see full redevelopment of a site, you know, there's often the question around sidewalks and the general frontage and how that's treated. And we typically see sidewalk rehabilitation. If there's a new curb cut, they're going to be touching that to a degree. In all likelihood, that 0-foot setback may turn into a 5-foot setback just because of we're mixing that public and private sphere of balancing sidewalk and balancing landscaping. But yes, that 0 provides as much flexibility as we possibly can. But yes, there are landscaping standards.
So the aim would be more landscaping in the public right-of-way as opposed to on private property? Is that kind of the aim with a district like this?
Not necessarily, but I see where you're going. And like, yes, there is a landscaping component, but then we get into maintenance obligations and responsibility and who owns this. And this is a conversation that we're having currently with DPW. In fact, we just sat down last week about this, and the intent, and especially in the fact that the majority of Nashville Street Network is part of what we call easement streets, where actually the property owners own the land to the center of the right-of-way. There's just a viatic easement for public use. So any landscaping that's actually within the right-of-way is probably actually the responsibility and is owned by the property butter.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. Free forum, please. Yes. Alder.
Just quickly, I don't know if you all know, I was the chair of Imagine Nashua in the master plan, and we've been working through this and with this for the last 6 years. So a quick question on this. I know there's been some back and forth in conversation around being able to attract the development, new development, redevelopment, while maintaining the citizen needs on that side. With flipping the parking lot and everything to the back, to me, quickly, doesn't sound like it's too drastic of a change. However, would that still pencil for developers?
I'm looking at Mr. Hirsch, who may have some thoughts on this.
I have a lot of issues with what you're talking about Northeastern Boulevard, for example.
Okay.
I don't see the scale ever attracting residential or a walking location. The size of the lots, the size of the buildings, the nature of the tenancies there, you're not going to have, I don't see the value of what you're talking about at all.
Okay.
Basically, I think it's going to hurt, and also putting the parking to the rear of the property. I don't see any benefit to that.
I see.
You're gonna have some buildings with frontage, other buildings will never be redeveloped, and they're gonna stay in their current condition.
Mhm.
So why, I just would almost rather see it as it is right now.
Mhm.
And I don't see much pedestrian activity on that street regardless.
Mhm.
Because you look at the nature of the tenants who are there, the people who are there right now, they're not gonna engender a whole lot of pedestrian traffic.
Sure, and I think that the standards around encouraging walkability, it's not about necessarily bringing people from the abutting neighborhoods into the district to walk there, but perhaps it's an amenity for the people who work there.
Yeah, and I'm saying, I just don't see the benefit there because of the
Okay.
size of the lots and all that, and the nature of the users in that area. I mean,
Sure.
you've got a whole range, and I just can't imagine much pedestrian activity.
Yeah. If I could comment on that, on the flip side, in a previous life and how we first met, I toured every single industrial warehouse that was within Nashua, and one of the things that we had trouble with was it needed to be on a bus route. In order for us to be able to attract and maintain the talent that we did need and the workforce that we did need. So, and with that comes being able to walk on the sidewalk to a bus station or stay at a bus station and not just on the edge of a road next to a telephone pole. So I'm not completely familiar with all of the buildings on the street off the top of my head without seeing it on Google Maps, but is that currently on a bus route?
I could not tell you off the top of my head.
Okay, because that would then
I
make
don't know.
sense for sidewalk walkability, for safety reasons. Think specifically winter, your employees are trying to get there, or when it's raining and you're walking through puddles and everything to get there. So I think that that's something to run parallel together that would make sense.
Adam, you had some thoughts as well?
Yeah, and so I was one of the planning board reps
Yeah.
for the master planning too, so I'm admittedly probably a bit biased.
Yeah.
But yes, and I would say this is not, this is one of the areas, the focus areas, another one that's maybe more illustrative of some of these concepts because it's just a larger area and it's more diverse, Amherst Street too. And we've had a couple of recent examples of redevelopments on Amherst Street where, we were trying to encourage, for example, moving the building as close to the street as possible. But at the time, we didn't have the tools within the zoning code to be able to compel that. Personally, I think, Larry, to your point, I mean, yeah, right now, Northeastern Boulevard is not a place that's gonna attract a lot of walkers, but that's in part because of the existing footprint you have there, where it's not really a nice place to walk. So, I think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg, and I agree with you in terms of, this is not something that's gonna happen overnight, right? Even if you impose these standards, it requires, redevelopment over potentially a fairly long term before you're gonna see real change. But, I still would be of the view that we should try to build standards that encourage that change, even if it doesn't happen immediately. And, even if we're not gonna see the benefit, tomorrow or next year, I foresee that, over a longer term, you could really change the dynamics of, some of these corridors and, make them into places where people would say, yes, this is a walkable area where I would not have, had that experience, or perspective before.
Bus routes 5 and 6 do go on Northeastern Boulevard.
Thank you.
The other concern is we're gonna try to have retail in that area. That's one of the uses that's in there. It's got some small restaurants and small other retail type things. If you don't have the parking in front of their doors, I think you're gonna really significantly affect the viability of those developments. We've seen over the years that without, like it or not, we're a car, it's an automobile economy. People are gonna drive. If they drive down the street and can't see an easy way to get into something, it's not gonna fly from a retail point of view. I don't see retailers going in that case. I see these small restaurants, for example, being very difficult to tenant in areas like that. if you don't have any parking at the front door.
I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously you have to have the parking. You know, again, I mean, there's clearly, I mean, there's plenty of places in the country where they've been able to make this work. And you can have successful businesses that, you know, don't have front door parking.
The front door.
You know, yeah, and whereas, yeah, I mean, and obviously you can address that part with having, you know, multiple entry exit points too. So, you know, I'm not saying it, you know, it wouldn't require people to sort of adjust their expectations to some degree. You know, but I think that, I think that there, like I said, there, you know, this is just plenty of precedent for this. You know, and even if you think about like the, you know, Main Street corridor, right? I mean, that's the sort of, the probably greatest use intensity of people, you know, traveling to an area of the city to go out to eat and that sort of thing. And, you know, most of the time, if you're doing that, you're not parking at the door and walking in, right? And you might have to, you know, park several blocks away, and that doesn't, at least in my anecdotal experience, deter people from, you know, from going down there to, you know, patronize those businesses and those restaurants. So I understand, you know, what you're saying in terms of, you know, it does require some sort of recalibration of people's expectations, but like I said, I think there's precedent to suggest that, you know, it can work and businesses can be successful with that model.
I just don't see it being viable. I just have dealt with enough national retailers in my other life and all that. They really have to have the visibility, the access, the convenience, the parking ability. I mean, it's just so critical. We could all day, and what'll happen is we'll basically chill, I think, development doing that. We'll go the other direction. We're not going to have the kind of small users and whatever else you want to see without that parking front and center. It's so critical, I can't begin to tell you from what I've dealt with over the years. A lot of towns have put in walking streets, Laconia, Salem, Massachusetts, places like that I'm familiar with, and they've been a disaster for all the retailers because they don't have the drive-by traffic and the on-street parking. And I just don't see us having enough population density to make what you're talking about work. Downtown's a different story, I think.
And what do you see that would make downtown different?
You've got tremendous density, you've got cross streets everywhere, traffic is slow. It's just, you know, you've got the synergy of the downtown area you don't have in Amherst Street, for example. You know, we don't have that level of activity on the street that you have in downtown.
Right. But I mean, isn't part of that, I mean, again, it seems to me it's the chicken and egg thing, right? I mean,
Right, it always is, yeah.
Yeah, you don't have that level of activity on the street because Amherst Street is a terrible place to be a pedestrian, so.
Right, and I just don't see the interest in pedestrian traffic along Amherst Street. Yeah, there are no question there are people there walking, but it's not a tremendous amount. Most of it's by automobile.
Right, not right now, but I mean, also think about how many, I mean, we've had a fair number of residential projects that we've approved along Amherst Street in the last couple of years. I mean, so you could see, I mean, again, I will grant you, I am not the expert on commercial real estate, and you are, so I.
There are always opinions.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't, you know, I don't mean to suggest in any way that, you know, that I have, you know, a better opinion or, you know, it's any more valid. But I do think that there's an element of this that it's like, you have to, the only way to see if it works is to try, you know, to put the standards in place. And you could be right, it could be a failure, but I don't know how you know that, you know, and I don't know how you attempt to create the change unless you compel, because again, I look at Amherst Street just because we've had some recent projects there as a good example where if you can't tell the developer, hey, this is the standard, and so this is what you have to do, and no, we're not gonna grant you waiver of that, they're just gonna say, well, no, we'll do what we think is best, and, you know, we're not gonna accommodate, this vision because it's not built into the code.
We approved a project a while back, up, I think it was where Buckley's restaurant is now, I forget. It never got constructed. It was, and I mean, anecdotally, for example, and basically they had all the parking in the back of the property towards that pond back there. I don't remember the details of this, so please correct me. But basically, that project never got off the ground because of the problems of people, you know, and I wasn't directly involved with that project. I know people were involved with the project, and they couldn't lease it, basically. They couldn't pre-lease it.
Yeah, I mean, that's because.
And because, you know, the reasons were, it was that the backs of the stores were basically on the street. The fronts were an interior parking lot. It wasn't viable. We found we've had tremendous success with a different project I'm involved with, which has got parking in front, and parking in back also, and visibility. It's made a huge difference.
Yeah. I mean, you do have, you mentioned Buckley's, I mean, Lost Cowboy, it's a little bit, it's kind of a mix, but I mean, that
No,
is.
I think we were going to tear that down at that point. Weren't they going to tear the building down and put another one in? We had approvals because,
Was this around Round Pond?
I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think they were, at one point, I think they were gonna try to hook in a fourth leg to the signal at Blackstone, but I don't know, it could be mixing and matching here.
I'm not sure if I've got everything straight, but I do know that the project was designed in such a way that it backed up to Amherst Street. And that was, you know, effectively made it impossible for them to.
Well, yeah, I was using the example of Lost Cowboy because that place is jam-packed all the time.
I didn't, yeah.
Yeah, so, and that's on Amherst Street, right?
Right.
Now, it's a little bit different because it's not, the parking's not entirely in the back, but it's mostly in the back.
I'm not talking that project at all.
Yeah,
What I'm talking
yeah.
about is what was conceived, and it was several years ago.
Right, right. I'm just saying that's an example where it has not seemed to inhibit the success of that location, you know, and there may be other factors that go into why, you know, why it's
You
successful.
know, and he was able to reuse the existing building, so, you know, that was the old community college, or whatever, it was a college.
There's a development along Amherst that keeps coming up to mind for me. It's 350 Amherst Street, where the newer Viva Trattoria is, and there's a Cava there as well, and a nail salon.
I know all about it.
I don't know if you guys are familiar. But it seems like that development is kind of an example of what we're talking about, an effort to kind of shift the facade closer to the street. And there is parking on, you know, all four sides essentially. And, you know, the parking in the front is certainly more popular. That's one thing that I will
didn't pay
say.
him for this.
Was that your development?
Well, it's funny you actually mentioned that. I recall sitting in a room with Larry and Dick Kane, and I also believe a few others, in having a conversation about this project and the way the building was originally designed. It was further back, but it was also butting up against a sewer easement. And the back of the building was like a sawtooth to avoid the easement. And you know, I tried to convince Dick to move the building forward and you know, the same question about, you know, we have to have parking in front. And we came to kind of a happy compromise where all the parking is not in the front. There is, you know, 2 rows of parking to provide that visual cue, but then the bulk of the parking is behind it. And it seems to be functioning well. And so I think it seems like we're trying to strike a balance here. And the way that we have it currently written in the code is not too far off from what we currently have right now. We're basically, you know, bringing the buildings is encouraged and preferred. However, we have, you know, a relief mechanism where you can demonstrate, you know, constraints or other means that you actually do need to have a row of parking. You know, I think, and I also think that Northeastern Boulevard and Amherst Street are very different. Where there's a lot more mix of uses on Amherst Street, whereas Northeastern, it's not really a destination except for people who are specifically going there, and because of that, I do believe that the form standards are slightly less critical because it's much more about function than form. I think in that location. I think Amherst is different. I think the form matters a bit more on Amherst, and the form matters greatly in Main Street. So I think we have 3 really good cases of inherently different environments, and I think that the form treatment should reflect those as well and the different goals of those areas.
Could you explain how the form actually, the term form, actually how that works? I don't really work with it.
Sure. So it's, one, the building placement, so how the building relates to the lot. So that's setbacks, right? But then also the form of the building itself. And, you know, we can get so granular as saying how, you know, maximum floor plate size, you know, is 48,000 square feet, 80,000 square feet. We can have those. I think when we're talking about truly industrial-oriented buildings, those matter less. You know, ceiling heights. Well, if we're talking about high bay warehousing, like, we don't want to tell you how big and how tall the ceilings need to be. Like, build it to the function. But also, first floor fenestration, you know, these standards, while they matter greatly in a very dense mixed-use environment where you do have that pedestrian activity, you know, if it's more about let's get the loading bays in an efficient location and design the building to function, the form standards matter less. So I think what I'm asking from this group is an understanding of how, like, where do we draw the line on the form standards? How important are they in this Northeastern Boulevard, very much more commercial and industrial focused environment, rather than the retail kind of mix of Amherst Street and in the far more mixed Main Street?
At the end of my ignorance, the site plan review. So basically, the form is that going to be the structure on which the site plan will be reviewed, and how it follows the standards?
Yes. Effectively, yes.
So then someone would have to go for a variance to deviate from that?
You would. There is, I'm going to get to another part of our relief where we're talking about, because we're introducing a new concept, we want to basically write into the code a temporary relief measure where you can vary these standards within a certain percentage off of what that base number is in the code, so that we can know then if that's being utilized, if that waiver, that flexible, you know, waiver is being used to modify the standards, we'll know how close we got with those standards, and if we need to change them, great. But more to your point, Larry, I think based on what we're seeing come through, what has been approved, what has been built, but then also what's already on the ground, and again, being sensitive to the different areas of the city, the different patterns we're seeing, we don't want to chill development. We also want good development, but good development is very subjective and based on where the development is going. So we want to craft good standards that are sensitive to the environment. Those environments, and therefore those standards, vary greatly depending on where you are. And I think, you know, couching this whole conversation around a truly dedicated commercial industrial area that is Northeastern Boulevard, trying to get a sense from the board, if this is in an area that is appropriate to walk those standards back, provide a lot of flexibility, and where we may end up is that while we have commercial business and commercial industrial districts, both on Amherst Street and in Northeastern Boulevard, perhaps those two locations are so different in nature, we need a different kind of commercial industrial district for Northeastern Boulevard, because the standards need to be more flexible than what are on Amherst Street.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your question, Sam, I would tend to agree with what I think you're suggesting, which is that, you know, again, well, Northeastern Boulevard, very different than Amherst Street. So from my perspective, I would be much more concerned about, interested in kind of more strictly enforcing the form standards on the Amherst Street corridor than on Northeastern Boulevard.
What do you think, Larry?
I disagree. I feel also that the program we went through in 340, 350 Amherst Street showed how well the current system works, basically. We negotiated.
It did.
You know, you had certain standards that we went back and forth, and I think everyone's fairly happy with the resulting product.
But I mean,
So-
I would have preferred that we had the standard. I would have said, no, it has, you know, again, you know, I look at it from the perspective of like, what was the purpose of enacting the master plan if we're just gonna say, Now, that's not really what we meant. You know, it was, and particularly with the focus on these specific areas of the city, there were, fairly specific standards and recommendations that were adopted. And if we just then adopt a code that basically ignores, the intent and purpose behind the master plan, then, again, I just look at it as what was the point of the master plan? And, again, from my perspective, that particular project is an example of where, we didn't do something, we didn't hold the developer to a stricter standard because we didn't have the authority to do it under the code. So there's really no basis for us to say, no, you have to put the building against the street. So yeah, in the context in which the project came before us, it was a good compromise because we didn't have the code standard to enforce it, but I would like to see the code standard to enforce it.
You and I will disagree.
Yeah,
Totally.
I appreciate that. I mean, we're to agree to disagree.
And I just have one last comment on that. When we were talking about Amherst Street, there was some really interesting facts and figures that were shared around it being, and maybe it's changed since then, but being the most unsafe in the city in terms of for cyclists and pedestrians, with the most occurrences of incidents on that street. There was a lot of different things that we had looked at in terms of do we focus on making it more pedestrian friendly or do we not? And there was talks about reducing the speed or the lanes or doing a parallel lane and having the center be, so there's a lot of different methods to get there, but when you're have an established city, how do you go from where you're at to that idealized version? But having it be, of course there's not pedestrians because it's not safe. If anybody has ever had to cross that street before, you're playing Frogger. Like, you just kind of do one of these before you cross the street, but but there's definitely more of a balance. But if we think way outside of that, this is our introduction to the city for most of that western, side of the state, or west?
Yeah, west.
West. And so when they're coming in, they think this is all Nashua is this commercial district, without realizing that the majority of Nashua is actually residential. But the feeling of Nashua is that it's mostly commercial and big box stores, because that's the natural progression down the street. So if it was more walkable, if it did look a little bit more pedestrian friendly, that could twist that point of view completely.
A couple of quick comments, one of which is the state highway.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think the state necessarily is going to be particularly
Yep.
cooperative with that, in that situation. Unfortunately, I went to some of the meetings for the master plan, and finally, there's no point to it. I heard people comparing it to all kinds of, they had all kinds of dreams for a Linfield marketplace, a Wayland Center, or whatever. I mean, it didn't make any sense. Economically, no one was looking at the economics, which I look at, obviously. They were looking at just, hey, gee whiz, this would be pretty. Well, it's not going to make nobody's going to be able to do it. It's not going to be able to be developed.
Right.
Because people just can't, you can't finance it, you can't make money doing it, and we're in a business where people want to make money. So I saw the master plan. I was, like I said, I went to 3 or 4 sessions, and finally, after the one at the library on the commercial stuff, I just said, this is insane. And didn't bother going because I didn't think it was at all practical. But that's another issue.
No, and I value that perspective greatly, Larry.
Alderman Morgan did get me thinking a little bit more about the traffic on Amherst specifically, and looking at, the plan of, comparing 2 different buildings with parking in the front versus parking in the back. There would be perhaps some driveway benefits to placing the building further up in the street, in that, if you had a corner lot, perhaps you could, have driveway entrances on side streets, and therefore get some of the, queuing traffic on Amherst Street coming in and out of the driveways. You would move that traffic away from the busy street, and, ingress and egress would be on a less busy street. So maybe that's something to think about as well. And, the fact that it's a state highway, usually there's a DOT driveway permit that developers would have to go through as well. So maybe alleviating some of that pressure, some of the permitting pressure, that would go along with driveway permits, maybe that's something to think about as well, is from a traffic perspective, getting some of those entrances and exits off of the main road
Well,
and
we-
migrating them to the side. I
Yeah,
don't know
we
if that's-
put basically a drive across the back of the development just for that purpose. So they can come in on Airport Road with a traffic signal and cut right across to the CMC emergency room, for example. And people can come out the same way and can go west. That wasn't,
Well,
we did that as a cooperation. We discussed it, just what you guys wanted. It worked for everybody.
And
Yeah,
actually, I was just gonna say, Sam, quick point of clarification, even though it's a state route designation, all of that section of Amherst Street is compact. It's basically city maintenance. State jurisdiction takes over just at the Continental Boulevard intersection, so, I
Really?
think,
That far out?
yeah, right at the town line, that's the compact line. So, Nashua, I think, has very little state-maintained highway, other than the Turnpike and Henry Burke Highway. That's basically it.
So the state would allow them to, excuse me, I'm just.
Yeah, and
to
the state,
change the right of way?
the state doesn't, basically what happens with the compact process, there's it's the state's responsibility to get it up to a good state of repair, and that probably happened at some point after 1971, and basically they did a paving project, they did a widening project, and basically said, City of Nashville, we paid for the project, here's the keys, you own it from henceforth. Yeah, so, and the state, even if they did have jurisdiction, they would not get into, just because of legislatively what they're allowed and not allowed to do, they wouldn't get into the granular level of site plan matters. They do have a larger permitting process, but it's really primarily with respect to highway and traffic matters.
If the effect if the effect Nashua has is to constrict traffic flow, so you have backups and all that, the state's not gonna get involved at that point. I mean, a lot of people were talking about the fact they could put other lanes into all kinds of other things and reduce the traffic flow, and the hell with the backups, with one of the comments I heard.
You still can apply, Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, there's been a Amherst Street corridor improvement project on the books for at least 2 decades.
in the 10-year plan, yes.
Yeah.
So you can still apply to have state funds improve a city-maintained section of highway. That doesn't preclude that, but the city or the state rather, is more or less gonna take a hands-off approach on the day-to-day. So I hope I didn't oversimplify that too much.
No, I think that was a good summary.
Right.
And I'd like to kind of tie this one up with a comment that reflects both Alderwoman Morgan and then Larry, your comments about the connection behind the buildings, but also, how we create a more walkable street. One thing that Amherst Street lacks is a parallel street network. When we talk about getting cars off of Amherst Street, if you need to go from Lost Cowboy to Target, you have to go back out onto Amherst Street. With 350 Amherst Street and the adjacent properties, those redevelopment projects, there is the beginning of a connected route off of Amherst Street. And that's something we want to do long-term. That's going to require corridor planning and a long-term coordinated effort around individual redevelopment projects and trying to establish that vision. This creates a good segue into the next policy question around the redevelopment overlays. And so what's unique about Amherst Street, and again, what sets it apart from Northeastern Boulevard, is not only it's a base of commercial business and commercial industrial zoning districts in the proposed code, but it also has an overlay. So the overlay, it unlocks residential as a use, but again, we want to see this deployed on larger lots where there is the opportunity for wiping the slate clean and redeveloping, and really those are our opportunities to establish connections with that parallel street network. So in a sense, we're trying to set up a regulatory environment where we realize the condition of Amherst Street. And while we recognize the vision that was articulated in the master plan, we do want to create that. But we recognize the economics, the value of the visibility for retail establishments off of Amherst Street. There is a need. But we can create that vision, step back off of Amherst Street, where we're not competing with the traffic volumes, the speeds, we're just separating the two environments and leveraging the volumes and just the flow and the amount of people on Amherst Street to support redevelopment and using, maintaining Amherst Street as an artery, but then developing behind that and creating connectivity so that it does not degrade Amherst Street's capacity as a thoroughfare for traffic, while also maintaining the value that it brings for those true front door commercial establishments that rely on that. And so while we recognize, yes, we do want to see those buildings right up on the street, well, I think there is a compromise to be had where maybe you do get those couple rows of parking to give that visual cue, but where we really want the buildings fronting right on the street is on that parallel street network where you actually can completely change the environment. You have a completely different, it's just a two-lane road. It's much more akin to Main Street where you have that denser, tighter density that would bring in more people to support the businesses, but also opportunities for a different kind of retail experience, more akin to Main Street. But that all is through the overlay process. Unless anyone wants to comment, Larry. I can begin to.
I just don't see it being practical economically to develop it. I mean, you're talking so many, like Amherst Street, for example,
Yeah.
which I'm familiar with. You got too many buildings there. You would have to, such takings would be impossible.
So it wouldn't be through a taking process, but as they organically come up,
Yeah.
there is this broader plan of when we're having those conversations around site layout, and there is a role that can be taken at the legislative level, map line a future street, say, hey, look, we as an elected body of officials at the aldermanic level say, we want to have this parallel street network, and there are actions that can be taken. It's not a taking of properties, but there is a policy guidance that could then be effectuated through the individual redevelopment of sites to complement some of the work that you've already done long-term, but it is a site by site by site. And that's something that that's the pace we'd see this anyways. It's not something that the city should be throwing millions and millions of taxpayer dollars at to accomplish this. The free market will do its thing, but let's just kind of guide it in a way that creates more opportunity from an economic standpoint, more frontage, right? Along an already bustling network, that being Amherst Street, but also creating and trying to manifest that vision articulated in the master plan.
But you're going to be reducing the ability of people to redevelop the existing sites because they're going to be restricted by that roadway.
But I mean, all zoning reduces the ability of people to develop
True.
sites. I mean,
True.
I think.
No, I'm not disagreeing with that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Sam, I like that concept. I like the idea of, and I think it is, Larry, to your point, it's more realistic in the sense that I do think that some of the depictions in the master plan are probably, just not, you are not gonna come to fruition in terms of just the look and feel of Amherst Street. I think the idea of creating that secondary network, but at the same time, I do still think that there's opportunities to create better pedestrian access and better pedestrian safety on Amherst Street. And, some of the look and feel, even if you're never gonna get to exactly what the aspiration of the master plan is.
Thank you. All right, next policy point. Context being the overlays. So these overlays exist on top of commercial business, commercial industrial. So the question is, when a developer has control of 20 acres and is changing it into a mixed-use neighborhood with potentially 4 or 5-story apartment buildings, maybe retail on the first floor, maybe structured parking, manufacturing as a conditional use in those overlays. What are your thoughts? We would employ restrictions in terms of we need a real plan of how noise is mitigated. So some of the potential noxious side effects that manufacturing can bring, noise, odor, vibration. Assuming manufacturing is largely contained within a building, we're not talking asphalt.
Well, I was going to ask.
We're
You
not
stole my
talking-
thunder.
We're not talking
All right.
asphalt plant.
Oh, all right,
No,
all right.
and let's be realistic, we're.
Should be only
The
asphalt.
the nature of manufacturing in the New England economy, it's fairly narrow, hopefully more of a high-tech orientation. But we want to provide space for that investment, right? So while we do want to leverage Northeastern Boulevard, can manufacturing with the right conditions live and operate in harmony in a mixed-use, mid-rise neighborhood as part of a redevelopment? And so again, the question is, would we be open to permitting manufacturing as a use via CUP in the overlays?
And just to be clear, are you saying, are we talking about creating new overlay districts, or are you talking about in existing?
So this is part of the overlay districts that would be deployed on Amherst Street, Daniel Webster Highway, larger portions around the downtown and out East Hollis Street. Those are the primary focuses of these overlays for significant redevelopment. Within those,
Can we specify, manufacturing is a very broad range, with the example of the asphalt being heavy industrial
Yes.
manufacturing versus light manufacturing.
there are those nuances in the code. So when you're thinking about manufacturing, think about enclosed buildings, like manufacturing is occurring in a building, not a open
Right.
outdoor yard.
The only concern I have is if you start pushing to multi-story manufacturing, I don't think it's going to be viable in New Hampshire.
It doesn't have, and it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Like, it could be.
I don't understand
Yeah.
that, looking at, what you're talking about. I have no problem at all with the idea of a 20-acre site
Mhm.
being master planned for, good quality residential, whatever. Makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, and I think to your height point, right? We're right next to the airport, and you do have height limitations. In fact, we have this really incredible, very detailed map that we have from the airport that basically has like the planes, and I don't mean wings planes, but the planes of no vertical penetrations to.
The approach path from the FAA.
That's what I meant to say. Exactly.
Dan, have you encountered that in your side job?
I have, I mean,
All right,
that's
all right.
actually one thing I was just going to bring up with mid-rise and high-rise zones. Is there any, has there been any strategy with that? It's like
Yes.
exactly how high should a high-rise development be? And, downtown is on the flight path for the Nashua Airport, so I mean, are we jiving with FAA in regards to their requirements?
Yes,
That was-
so we're actually taking that map and we're adding it into our collection of zoning maps that will be the zoning atlas for the city. And that will be an overlay in regulating heights. So if you have a, 20-foot tall, maybe it goes even a little bit higher, but really single-story manufacturing, maybe you have some, high racks for storage or what have you. That can be that first step from the runway, right? Like you step up as you get towards Main Street because you need that clearance, if you will. A smaller building closer to the airport, which in itself is going to have noise and, all those sorts of things. You buffer from that with, airport, industrial, other business, and then as you get closer to the Amherst Street, you would introduce the mid-rise character.
Just a general thought, Sam, it seems like there's already some element of that. I don't know if I would exactly classify it as manufacturing, but there's some businesses you could at least argue are maybe analogous to that right now,
Yes.
already on Northeastern Boulevard and Amherst Street. I don't know if I'd call Amazon operations manufacturing, but it's
Sure. Right.
something like that. You have
Yeah.
large buildings with a lot of, heavy vehicle traffic, things like that. So that doesn't, to me, that does not seem out of character personally.
And I think you've identified the right thing, right? So the overlay, while it applies to the Amherst Street corridor as a whole, it's one property that's going to redevelop. Maybe there's an assembly of a couple parcels, but it's only a portion of the corridor. And the character of the corridor is, defined by, the townhouses we've been seeing developed, but also, the Stag building, 300,000 square feet of warehouse, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff. So, no, a manufacturing building would be in character in the base zoning of commercial business and commercial industrial, but when you come in with an overlay, the question is, does that overlay now change the character and it's setting a new pattern? Or are we through this process being the CUP, are we nodding to what's already there and saying, oh yeah, no, we do want to make space for manufacturing, even in the overlay as things redevelop, because we recognize what's there and frankly, what's not going anywhere in large parts of Amherst Street, and that's a good thing. So, manufacturing as a conditional use in the overlay.
If we don't have to vote on it tonight, yes, that's,
Yeah.
in theory,
Yeah.
I think so.
I think,
yes.
I think so, I get the right limits on the type of manufacturing, but yeah, I mean, it seems reasonable.
Very good. And there's just a visual. The dark blue on the left, that is commercial business. The light blue is commercial industrial. So as we were just saying with the airport, the heavier, theoretically, the heavier the permitted uses are closer to the airport. That more retail experience is closer to the corridor. That jives with what Larry's been saying about, the uses that need that traffic and that visibility are closer to the corridor. It'd be zoned as such. But then on the right, you see the overlays where the red is a higher intensity. And then as you step back off the corridor, slightly lower intensity. And these are district groups, that's a whole different thing, but basically you can think of height analogous to the level of intensity. More height closer to the artery being Amherst Street. So just that base versus overlay comparison for the exact same location. All right, so coming into another piece here. This does play in the overlays, but it's also more downtown focused because we have different overlays in different parts of the city. So in the downtown overlays, we have this language, and we just want to hear if this is good and the intent is here, right? So when someone comes in and does a building in the downtown overlay, should we have this, we can keep this language saying that the building facade should be complementary to the historic structure. Architecture. Currently, we kind of have this. We have to maintain unique aesthetic, architectural, and visual amenities of individual buildings or clusters of buildings. So that does exist right now in the code. That's also reiterated in some of our site plan approval criteria to highlight this as a stark contrast. These are opposing buildings right at the same spot on Main Street. You have modern architecture and a very historic building as well. So the question is this good? Or if you're in the downtown overlay, should it always be historic and nodding to that historic character? How flexible do we want to be with the styles? Now, when we talk about form-based codes, when we talk about windows and roofs, both of these would be permitted. You're still hitting your glazing requirements, you're still hitting your general floor plates and your heights. The massing is all okay. The general componentry and attachments, all okay under form standards. But the architectural style, that's that next step in form standards. And in certain areas of the city, that next step may be worth taking, but that's where we need some guidance. Oh, and we have a member of the public here who would like to comment as well.
Yeah.
The only comment I would have is that sometimes imitation of historical buildings doesn't come off very well. And
That's a fair
sometimes
observation.
it's like a mockery, it just doesn't work. And to require that, I think, would be a problem.
That's a very good point.
My thought on this is not changed in the last 6 years. If it is important, then what I would like to see is a master plan from our historical commission to say, here is what we would like to see happen within the historic district, with that, the likeness of what they would like to see and the form and the colors and all of that. Otherwise, if it's not important for them to create that and do that as the body representing that, then why is it important?
Let me just say, to contextualize this a little bit, we're very intentionally not putting an overlay on top of the historic district. Because these
Smart.
overlays are redevelopment overlays. We don't want to say through this policy that we want to redevelop the historic district. That is
Smart.
not at all the intent. So while I understand the point of the question,
Yeah.
and there's certainly elements of Main Street that are currently outside of the district, very well could be a part of the district. The question is, when we get out of that, and there is total redevelopment, say a building on Main Street is leveled, there's a vacant spot, maybe 300 Main Street, right? You're further down, it's a big plaza, might redevelop in the future. It is a little further away from that real core Nashua downtown character. Do we tell it, you need to mimic the building on the right, and you're precluded from doing any modern architecture?
I would, sorry.
No, you finish.
And maybe Larry would be able to add some context to this, but unless we're doing, what is it, the 86B, 86?
79E?
That one, 79E, then I don't see how that would be affordable. In some cases, like, I don't know the address, but the Garden, at this point, that building, in reality, just needs to be brought down and then rebuilt, so it is within all of our proper current code enforcements. So I don't even know if it, to your point, if it makes sense, dollars and cents, to be able to sustain that. They don't make them like that anymore for many
Thank God.
reasons.
Right. I think the problem is economic, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, you please.
No, it's economically, I don't know how, with the cost of construction today, you can possibly build that to be leased out in any way that makes any sense. I mean, it wouldn't justify the cost by a long shot.
Sorry, you're saying building it to align with the historical standard?
I'm just saying,
Or-
we're rebuilding it, yeah.
But I'm
So
saying
this would
just
be
as between the two.
rehab of existing structure.
Right, I'm saying rehab, yeah.
That's the economic way to do it.
Right, that would make sense. Utilizing it basically for a new garden. I'm not saying it's a desirable thing, but what else can you do?
No, makes sense.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Oh,
I know I'm a guest, and I appreciate you allowing me to speak, like anybody could stop me, right?
Pat, I think we're going a little bit free form at this point, so
Okay.
we can dispense with the
Okay,
formalities.
thank you. I agree, and I disagree. The problem, so for instance, on this particular building you're showing, I was on that committee, as was Alderman Morgan. I didn't want to see the building to be like this because I kept feeling like it didn't fit in with it. But a lot of good points had been brought up. When you go down Main Street, we have 1960s buildings, we have 1970s building. The building that was taken down, I think, was a 1930s, 1950 or 70 kind of building.
Scott, you want to put a year on that for us?
Yeah, I would say the Miller's Department Store that came down was probably from the 70s and things along those lines.
Yeah.
But,
So-
yeah, I think we should also maybe talk about facade restoration as well.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and that was the point that I was going to make. I'm just speaking like from the historic district type thing, we have no colors that, people can choose whatever colors they want. They have to keep in character of the neighborhood if they're taking an old home and rehabbing it and so on. So to have taken maybe this building that they knocked down, that 1980s portion of that building, we really didn't want to see them put up a 1980s building. But if they were to put up with the characters, I mean, I'm going to bring up the building that Zsa Zsa Bells is in. That is not within the character of it. So the point that I was making is, as you drive down Main Street, we see the Oddfellows building, we see the old Telegraph building, we see all these beautifully, but they're all different ages, they're all different type of things. So which architect do we have to keep them in? I would love to see something like maybe a facade that had to be keeping with it, and not rebuild the building that you're showing here, or an Oddfellows building, any of those things. That's what I'm thinking of. But in truth, in the downtown area, times have changed. Money is a concern. I think if we get too strict and too stringent, no matter what I like, no matter really what even the public likes, we don't want to end up with a downtown that nobody wants to come and build in. So we have to be practical at it. I would love to see all the historical architecture keep with it because, you know, you go to any old downtown and you're just kind of, I go to Chicago and I just look at all the different architects that's there. I love it. It's just that. We have just different kinds of architect there. I'm not necessarily happy with the Performing Arts Center, but you know what? When people go by, it's a building that kind of stands out. People go, oh, there's where the art center is, because it's a more modern style of building. It's not the palace or something like that. But anyways, it's my 10 cents.
Can I jump in? I've seen other, examples that, certain towns and cities put forward. They're like styling guidelines or architecture guidelines. And they speak to things like, materials in the facade. Maybe a certain town really likes red brick. I see a lot of red brick in downtown Nashua. Maybe there would be certain guidelines that we could put out that would specify certain colors that we would like to see downtown. Different materials. That way you could get away with doing a modern building if you wanted, or if, a developer wanted to do that, but you'd still have a little bit of that character. Maybe you'd incorporate some red brick. Maybe there'd be, a granite facade or a stone facade as well that could be incorporated in, and, the colors could speak to that as well. So maybe, certain guidelines along those lines, not necessarily specifying the type of architecture or the form, just, some of the colors and some of the materials that we'd like to see.
Literally, I could not have asked for a better segue. The question
You
is,
looked ahead, didn't you?
No.
should we
Didn't share
develop
this with us. I didn't see it.
material standards for certain districts? Call it, let's keep it focused on the downtown overlay. So when there is a significant redevelopment, do we have a list of materials that we'd like to see? And is it the red brick? Is it any materials that we don't want to see? And I'm going to keep going because this is all topical. EFS is a divisive building material. It's cost effective, it's energy efficient, it goes up well. There can be major issues with installation. If water gets behind it, it can be a major problem. It does not weather particularly well, and sometimes it's not very durable. It all comes down to the installation. Right now in our code, in the downtown district, and I'm talking about current code that we're under right now, it's a permitted material. We see it deployed a lot. Planet Fitness is covered in it. So is Hannaford's. I mean, a lot of the big box stores everywhere have it. And I think it might be one of those materials that is contextually appropriate, and maybe not so contextually appropriate in the downtown. Maybe, maybe not. But out on Amherst Street, DW, it's, you have national chains. It is part of their portfolio. It's how they do it. We're not Sedona. We're not going to get turquoise arches for McDonald's, but EFS. It's a question of is this a material that we want to exclude from certain districts or prohibit entirely, or say, have at it?
But this is a situation where it's very qualitative, depending on the quality of the job. I've seen really good EFS jobs, I've seen terrible ones. You're right, they don't last, but economically, sometimes it's cheaper after 15 years to replace it for tax reasons and everything else. So it's, who are we to say, I guess is what I'm asking. That you can't use EFS, but you're going to use brick.
Right.
I mean, I just don't think it's a realistic thing for us to do. The question is, how do you legislate, how do you determine quality of a project? And I don't know how you can do that.
Larry, do you think that the economics change or the feelings towards where it matters more differs where you are in the city? I think, the juxtaposition of downtown versus Amherst Street.
Well, I'm saying EFS, if it's done well, really well, and there are people who do it really well, it can look really great.
Yep.
It can look almost as good as brick, I think, in a lot of situations, or close
We'll
to
say
there.
350 Amherst Street has EFS and it looks pretty darn good. It's also a brand new building.
I would add stucco to that.
Well, they're almost interchangeable.
Yeah, they're
Okay.
basically the same item.
I was like, it's just not like that spray paint like you see out west, stucco style.
Right.
Yeah. We 400 Amherst Street, 402 Amherst Street are just EFS,
Yep.
basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Ben's suggestion about creating some style guide, so not requiring strict adherence to a particular architectural standard, but keeping elements, because it seems to me like going back to the sort of I don't know if it's the Oddfellows building that's across from the Art Center. But, I mean, I think there's room for modern and historical. But the idea of like preserving some level of, feature from some of the historical buildings is, I think that's a good idea.
If I could just add something, the downtown, you probably have maybe 18 to 20 buildings or so that already have facades that have been covered up. I mean, Martha's Exchange was one of the first facades that was restored in the downtown. If you saw pictures of that from the 70s or the late 60s, there was plastic yellow and orange all the way on the side. All that was taken down, and they kind of brought it back. There's cast iron columns in the front, and there's also cast, with a different material they look exactly the same. So there's plenty of other materials that you can use and interchange on facades. You don't have to necessarily do that, but many of these buildings, we already have old pictures of what they look like, and they look pretty attractive at that time. And if those were to be brought back, and you could have, I think we have EFS downtown anyways, I believe. I mean, I think they redid the buildings from Water Street. Yeah, right on the Water Street,
Yeah.
Main Street, that's EFS there, so, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's kind of improved the
Yes.
look of that corner, because it used to be bright yellow, all kinds of, it was very different, so. Just a thought, just to throw it out there.
But I just want to reiterate what I said, is that when you drive even the heart of Main Street, the number of different types of architect that's there, and I think the Historic District technically ends at the Main Street Bridge, doesn't it?
Yes.
It doesn't go over the bridge there, so peddlers and the Hidden Pig and so on, they fall within the Historic District, but not beyond that. But if you go past that bridge and you look at, on the corner, as you said, of Water Street and so on, versus what's across the street from it, the old Telegraph Building, and you move down that way and you start looking at the left and the right. The architect on all of those are from different time zones. And I guess in some respects, that is what downtown is. It's different time zones. So which one would you say to them that they have to meet the requirement? Is it they have to meet the requirement of the one across the street from them, the one next to them, the one behind them? I think it would be extraordinarily difficult. I like the idea of material. I like the idea of, putting some aspects. When we talk about, meeting a certain requirement, I think in people's minds, at least in my mind, I'll only speak for myself, I immediately thought about things like the Oddfellow building. But I know where Jaja Bell's is, and that's a completely different, and that's right there as well. Where Gentle Dental is obviously right within all that, where the bank is next to it. And then, of course, you look at Union, whatever it's called now, but was Via Banca, because it was a bank at one time, So that has a completely different architectural, that's the Masons building or something like that. So there's just too much historical architect in there to say that we would be picking one. Or even saying picking next door, because you could live next to 3 different types of, so which one do they adopt?
I think somewhat analogous, and Alderman Clee, I think you weren't here for this part of the discussion.
Thank you.
I think it's partly, I don't think this is going to happen overnight, like some of the examples we were talking about on Amherst Street, but if there is some sort of preferred style guide, and again, I'm not an expert, I couldn't dictate building materials, but I think that's the thing. If you do have a redevelopment or something going forward, Ben, you may have run into this in your day job. You have a lot of communities, Sam, that very vaguely state they want Cape Cod standards, or architecture, but they have no definition of what that means. There's no stylistic guidelines that are associated with it, or often there's not. So your interpretation of Cape Cod architecture is could be different than mine. So I guess again, I'm not trying to be overly prescriptive with this, but I think if there's any place you could attempt to be a little bit more prescriptive, I think it would be the downtown area. Personally, my opinion only, I like the older buildings. It's nothing against the new ones. I'm not saying you should tear down everything that's there now. That's not practical and rebuild it that way. But if there's that opportunity, this is probably one area, you're talking a couple of blocks that if you could target some intended design, I personally wouldn't be opposed to that. Do they have the qualifications to say what that should be? No, I do not. But I think if we were to be a little bit more strict in certain areas, I think it would have to be confined, very tightly geographically. And again, I think the intent here is not to have everybody, you don't have to take out what's there now, but if there is an opportunity for redevelopment, that, again, if you could put some bumpers on that, but again, that's just my 2 cents on that one.
So to summarize, I'm hearing style guide because it offers guidance, but also flexibility. And the application of that would be in the downtown overlay. So informed by Main Street, but applicable, a few blocks around it. So we extend that character as that area thickens up, matures, redevelops.
So you go.
Thinking about a developer that would come forward and, present a new development that, would have these styling guides in mind, I think that's a really powerful point on their side to say, oh yeah, we did look at the lookbook or, the style guidelines. We did want to, blend into the fabric of downtown. We wanted to blend into what was already there. I think that's a really good selling point that a developer can come forward with and not say, oh, we want to shove our architecture into the city or whatever. It's a good selling point, I think, definitely.
And it kind of hits that point again of predictability, right? A style guide assures predictability in the process for a developer saying, we hear all the time, developer comes in, well, what do you want to see? Right here, style guide, do this. But also for the public, they're not going to be shocked by something that's way out of character. We have some guidelines. There's a lot of flexibility within the guidelines, but it's not going to result in something crazy. And so if you take the Performing Arts Center as one end of the spectrum, I think that there's a lot of ways that you could do modern architecture, but also incorporates materials from the style guide that do nod towards the more historic character of Main Street. And I think there can be a happy blending of the two. And, I think that sets the parameters, if you will, and the flexibility. But material guidance, I think, is a great place to start.
I think, Sam, just to add another thought on that, I think if you were able to do it in an area, I think Main Street makes the most sense, only because they're typically smaller, and not everyone, but mom and pop type shops, at least more on that side. Unlike Amherst Street, where the most recent one recently, I think, was the Ford repairs.
Yep.
You get these national brands. Ford says the building has to look like this, and
Completely agree.
that's going to happen. I think that's less likely to happen in this area. Again, I'm certainly not in a position to dictate what's stylish or not, but again, I think maybe some special dispensation for Main Street wouldn't be out of character. So
Funny you mentioned that, Bob. One of the ideas many years ago was there were many auto dealerships along Main Street, and they were kind of taken away from the character of Main Street, and they built the New England Automotive Village so that people could move down there and make it more convenient. And I think the last Main Street major auto dealership was the Lincoln dealership on East Hollis Street, and they eventually moved out, and more retail filled in.
The overlay in the downtown area, how far out does it go from Main Street? Because I'm thinking of like all the little side streets, of the little shops. Again, where
West
Alderman
Street.
Morgan's, florist is, looking at that and so on, and going up Temple, and I see different small businesses there.
Mm-hmm.
And also keeping in just Main Street, when we're looking at the Performing Arts Center, right next to it, we have the Surf. And then right next to it, we have all those other shops, the Euro, Joann's, and all that, and these tiny little shops. And on the other side, of the Performing Arts Center, we've got that bank, you know, across the street. From there, we have and I'm so sorry that I keep forgetting the name, I keep wanting to go back to Via Banca, which I'm very upset with them, but.
Union Public House.
Union Public House, thank you so much. It's a great place to go, but anyway, so how far out would we be extending this requirement? Because I'm seeing these really small shops, and
Yeah.
so my concern is that, and I know there's some vacancies right around where, you know, the florist is and so on, so I guess I have some concerns
The
there.
applicability of design guidelines, that's in the spatial applicability on the map, that's another policy question. The overlays in the downtown, they function a little differently than the Amherst ones, where that's a district group and there's a lot of flexibility because you're creating something new. We want to see variability. In the Main Street downtown area, the overlays is an immediate just upzoning. We prescribed like the next level of intensity that's appropriate, that's context sensitive. So I think where those lines are will much more easily inform where the the design guidelines apply. But looking kind of at the map, I could see this stretching along some of the corridors, so it could go down East Hollis Street a ways, it could go down Temple a ways into the Mill Yard, a little further south down Main Street. I think capturing 300 Main, should that ever redevelop, is a good idea. But I think there's some natural cutoffs where, like, even as you get into the tree streets, those have very standard, you know, that's where you see the triple deckers, you know, maybe the brick doesn't work on that, so there's the line there. Maybe it's at Elm Street, right, but you still capture West Pearl because there's character there, right? So that is a separate layer, if you will, on top of the overlay, is to say where those design standards would be applicable.
Just one more other comment to Mr. Bollinger's comment about the Ford dealership. I remember when Dunkin' Donuts in the Historic District, they came to us and said, you know, I've got to change our sign, we've got to change our lighting, the sign on the building and so on, because the corporation of Dunkin' Donuts had mandated it, you know, changing their name, doing all this stuff, and we had to struggle with that. So I guess my question would be, would we build in that they could come to planning or zoning, or whichever board would be the appropriate board, to call for a hardship for an exemption of that type of style? Would that still be applicable to them? And if so, that might be the avenue of them being able to come in and saying, cost is just too extraordinary, this is a hardship, we want to help the city, we want to build and not leave it vacant. But would they have an avenue to come in for exception of variance, whatever
Certainly,
would be the
they
appropriate?
always will, whether
Okay.
it's all the way at the end of a variance or if it's somewhere of a slightly lower bar. That's part of the discussion to be had.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're going to move into uses a little bit. This is in regards to residential use classification. This is a fun little slide I've been working on for quite some time because there's a lot in here in the sense that right now in our current code, we talk about single family, we talk about duplex, we talk about triplex, multifamily, elderly housing, halfway house, room renting, all of these different types of residential, some of which are handled by form standards. If you look at like large house as a building type, well, that could be single family. It has a density factor, so maybe in districts where duplex, triplex, multiple units is appropriate, you could still have a large house, but maybe it's 3 units. What are we calling that as a use? Well, it's residential. Single family kind of falls away when you are regulating density based on the building types. So to simplify this, much as we're following the simplification of our use categories, where we're taking individual uses, all 300 some odd uses, and we're trying to consolidate them into more broader categories so that when something comes in that we've never seen before, well, we can say, well, oh, this is clearly, you know, retail sales. Very broadly speaking, you don't need to go get a variance because you don't exist as a use in the code. It gives us a lot more interpretive flexibility while also being more friendly to businesses that want to come in and then may be nuanced, right? So sticking with that vein of consolidation into use categories, these are all of the uses for residential, like any sort of like where you lay your head at night sort of use. These are all of them that are in our current code. So the idea would be to separate into residential, or we could call it household living. That would all be the things in the yellow. So that's ADUs, conservation subdivisions. That's more of a design thing, but condominiums, duplexes, manufactured housing, a lot of these deal with form standards, but the use is all residential. It's all household living, a person or a group of people living as a household, in a household keeping unit, functioning as a household, right? But then we also have more interesting living arrangements like co-living or group living. And we talk about room renting, where you have shared facilities, which would be, you're renting a room, but you have access to the kitchen, versus, you're in a triplex, everyone has separate facilities. There may be 2 rooms, you may have a roommate, but you renting the unit, you have your separate facility, then the unit upstairs. So the separation of facilities is a key element between residential and co-living or group living. The next level would be co-living with services. So this is really important, and we've been burned before with Fair Housing Act, as a regulation of like sober homes, right? So those are individuals living together as a household under fair housing, right? So this is a federally protected class of individuals. Where the question comes in, is there care involved? Are people coming there and administering services? If they are, that moves from a sober home, which is just residential, into a halfway house. There's clear and protected differences under federal law that we need to be aware of. But also in that same vein of co-living, group living with assistance or with help, could also be nursing homes, assisted living facilities, where there is clear, like, some people live here, but there's programming, there's services, there's assistance, and that can take many forms, but we want to make sure that we capture that, because that is very different from co-living or group living, but it's also very different from residential. And then the final piece, which isn't really residential at all, this is just commercial lodging. So like hotels, bed and breakfasts, things like that. So we're talking about just simplifying this into residential, group living, and group living with services.
Would the co-living also apply to those recent homes that have been popping up that have people that have special needs that at one point were
Group living with
sent out,
services.
right, sent out of the state? Sometimes there's only one person living in the house.
Slightly different because that is a state agent and they are
Okay.
not subject to local land use
But
regulations.
it's those that are administered, they're contracted by the state. They're not the state per se.
Still subject to RSA 674-50.
So we have no say over, none of this would apply to any of those
We would still
particular homes.
classify them as group living with services because that's what they are, but that doesn't matter to them because they're exempt from local land use regulations.
Right, so that, again, the reason why they didn't come to planning or zoning or any of
Right.
those things like that. So this does not change that.
Nope.
It only changes what we would once call the sober living home, but that had staff that was there all the time
Yep.
administering medications and so on.
Group living with
Okay,
services.
thank you.
Can I just ask, looks like there's 2 remaining types that are not highlighted in any of the 4.
Yep, I apologize. So the second one on the right side of the table, that's multifamily dwelling, that
Right.
would be residential.
Residential, okay.
And
Yeah,
then
I
the
just-
one below that is overnight camping trailers. This is a whole other topic. Wasn't really looking to dig into this. This is basically an RV, if you will. Right now, our current code allows it to be occupied on a lot for 30 days. There's a whole bunch of other things that we could go down.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go down that rabbit hole. I'm just curious, is it, like, was that an intentional exclusion?
Nope, that is my formatting and highlighting
Okay.
error.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Wilson.
Sorry.
No, fair question, though. Any other comments on this residential simplification we are taking in the code? All right. They all get easier from here on out. Oh, yeah, I even cited some new state laws. Oh, yes, standalone self-storage as a use. Do we want to continue to allow it as a principal use, as in it's the only thing on a lot, self-storage, or do we want it to be paired with something? Do we talk about form, right? So when you think about self-storage, in most cases, you just see those rows and rows of buildings, metal fab, very cheap build. It's cheap for construction, it's cheap to rent space, it absolutely serves a function. Do we want something more visually pleasing, multi-story, like U-Haul and Bluebird? They have facilities that are multi-story, self-service, but just it's not the same rows and rows of buildings. This is a use we get called on fairly regularly, people looking to develop these. Right now, we permit them in our industrial districts. We also permit them by conditional use in the general business and the highway business. However, as part of the CUP, the facilities, the buildings, they have to be at least 200 feet from public right-of-way, which is quite a setback. Everything has to be screened from view, plus a 40-foot landscape buffer from that use in any abutting residential uses. So that's already quite a standard there, which kind of indicates a feeling about that use in any sort of, adjacent to residential contexts. So, thoughts?
There's this storage unit that's over by the Marriott. That's a large facility. It's not like the orange buildings or anything like that. You have to walk into the place and it's got all the storage, but from the outside, it doesn't look like what you were talking about. Are you talking about putting a standard more like that to it, or just maintaining the current standard that we have that says it's got to be set back off? Because I'm thinking of the U-Haul ones that are over, actually, I don't know if that's still Nashua, but the one that's over by Market Basket off of 101A.
It is still Nashua.
Yeah,
yes,
that's
but
still
way
Nashua.
out, yep.
And while those are still off the road, the minute you turn down that road, you see these kind of buildings and so on.
Yep.
I personally would prefer the other ones, but I know they put them up cheap so that, but it's a lot of land.
There's an
use.
economics thing, but you're getting to the key form differences of the two styles. And I think that if it is in that more vertical form, the setbacks, we don't have to worry as much, right? Because it's more neighborly, if you will.
It is.
It's a
It's
much
very
more
nice.
pleasant experience to
Yeah.
walk past.
We're inside One Chestnut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's another good example. Yeah,
Very
One
hidden.
Chestnut.
Yeah,
You wouldn't know it, but it's.
yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, I guess the question, in certain districts with the, single rise, prefabricated metal building, that sort of a traditional storage use, would we still want to permit that in certain districts? Do we want to allow it at all? Do we want to prohibit it? Is self-storage now in a more vertical form? I think there's contexts in the city where both could be appropriate. But Nashua land values are rising. This is not a particularly value-add sort of use. Do we want to see higher and more productive uses out of the remaining land we have in the city?
With our vision and goal of housing and lack of, I would much rather see undeveloped land be used for that purpose versus.
Because we're on housing, I just want to put a thought in. People have stuff, right?
Mhm.
And maybe some of the apartments that are going up are small. Where are people going to put their stuff?
That's
Yeah.
a good opportunity for people to get rid of stuff.
And personally,
Yeah, more
personally,
seriously.
when I was selling my house, that's where most of my stuff went, so that the house didn't look quite as crowded, and we rented one we rented that
clear
particular
need.
one. We rented that particular one that I mentioned that was by the Marriott and so on, because it was climate controlled, it was indoor, it was just so much versus, I didn't have to deal with any flooding or anything else like that. And I wanted my stuff in a nice, safe place.
Far more expensive of a facility.
Actually, it really wasn't. No, it was not. I was shocked. And they had the same opportunities of different sizes. So I don't think that maybe cost will be. We already have some that are here, and that people can go to if necessary, because we can't force them to do anything. I would rather see, and this is just my opinion, I would rather see the more high-rise style of building that can be closer. That would give the opportunity, they would need less land, and that would give the opportunity perhaps land for other usages. I would not say stop building them within the city, because I think cities need them. I think if they're within eyesight, they should definitely be the verticals. Those, when I go to Market Basket, if I go down that way and I go to that Market Basket, I just see those and it just looks like a wasteland there. It's just, you're coming off of that little strip mall that, you know, it's nicely tasted and so on, and then you just see this, and you go down the street more and there's manufacturing companies, and I think the hospital thing might still be there and so on, but I used to walk down there with the dogs into the woods, but I would like to see the uprights, especially within any kind of vision of the street.
Larry, were you going to make an economic case for us?
Yeah, one thing. Somebody's got it. In Amherst, there's a project right behind Frederick's Pastries there, which has got a lot of contractors renting units there, a lot of commercial people renting units, interestingly. So it's a funny kind of a thing is happening. A guy has a project, he needs storage space for 6 months. His industrial space can't handle everything. Needs something to run to very quickly. He's an electrician. I don't know what an electrician is, that's big. So he keeps all his crap out there. So I'm not quite sure how it fits into the whole matrix. It's just kind of interesting. I've seen a lot of that happen. And it would seem also like you could have basically go both ways. Have the current zoning standards for what you have, and then obviously much more dense for a smaller lot on multi-story.
Yeah, context-based.
So I think you'd be able to work both ways.
And some people do store things like motorcycles
Right.
and equipment that.
Well, and outdoor storage also.
Right,
which
so
is
that
another
needs
issue.
the outdoor storage, but some of these high-rise can still have the outdoor storage on the bottom. They still can do that.
Yeah.
The rest of it's indoor, you just don't realize, it just looks like garages that they can have. And I've seen that design.
Yeah.
For people who want, there's some people who want to put their boats in it, smaller boats. They want to put motorcycles, and you can't really bring them to a building and get it on an elevator up to whatever floors, it just doesn't work through the doors. But, so I think certain things can be done, and obviously, we're not going to hurt the ones that are already here.
To speak on, the benefits of a self-storage facility from a city's perspective as well. I've always thought that they were a very low-maintenance type of development for a city. It's, a reliable tax base, the city collects taxes from it, but there really isn't much, emergency services that facility would require. There's really not that much utility demand aside from electricity, not much water use or sewer generation. So, I always thought that they were very low-maintenance developments and not really a headache for the city. The police department generally doesn't worry about a self-storage facility, things like that. So I always thought that from a city's perspective, they were more of a low-maintenance development, and therefore, maybe we should encourage them
I
on
really
that
like
reason.
the revenue to cost to service case to be made. It's very.
It's one thing I've
good
heard,
insight.
yeah, that they're.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that.
I have a question on that, because that's really an interesting thought. If you took one of the Brown sites, that in theory, any spot that you can only have a park or a parking lot, many of those units don't have lights inside. And so in theory, if it was a parking lot, you would be able to just put that on top of it.
Right, they're fairly easy to construct, and, you don't have to worry, like, with all, I guess a big talking point with, like, the new data storage facilities, it's like the utility demand, the electricity demand, it's so insane. And it's like, well, with a development like this, it's just turning the lights on. But nobody's using a toilet in there, no one's, cooking,
Hopefully.
and there's no,
Yeah.
right, there's no,
Hopefully, yeah.
there are no faucets in there. It's not a residential use where you have those generation demands.
No.
It's not a bar, no one's getting rowdy at 2 in the morning, Hopefully at a self-storage facility.
Yeah, they're storing drugs in.
Yeah,
That's another problem.
there is a risk there, but, yeah, that's one thing I always thought, so was
But
they're
they'll
more,
find another
more
place.
low maintenance and low cost,
Yeah.
right, from the city's perspective.
All right, after party at Ben's storage unit today. Okay, well, I think I got some good guidance on that. Thank you for that. All right. New concept, a landscaping payment in lieu, eligible by CUP. Good example would be the development of a car dealership. They don't love to have trees in the middle of their parking lots dropping leaves or acorns or anything else that trees drop on their brand-new shiny cars, right? So, okay, fine, we get that. That's a reasonable hardship. So rather than instead of coming to the board and getting a blanket waiver, and, you don't have to plant any trees. You apply for a conditional use permit, and then you do a payment in lieu, so you don't have to plant any trees, but you pay that cost of acquisition of trees and the labor to install and general maintenance into a fund that the city maintains, and then we'd work with DPW to deploy those funds to re-green areas of the city that are devoid of trees. Ironically, the tree streets would be a good example of that. But basically, you don't get to get off scotch-free. Everyone's subject to landscaping requirements, but instead of just, saying, all right, fine, here's your waiver, don't worry about it, we actually want those trees, we're just gonna put them somewhere else that's more appropriate.
Yeah, I guess the only question I have about that is the concept, you use the auto dealership as an example. Like, I understand, like, they don't want to have the landscape medians, right, but I would want to say, well, there's zero landscaping on the
No.
site. So is this would be targeted to specific types of landscaping? Is that the idea?
It would be constrained. You'd have to, so there'd be CUP criteria, just as we have general CUP criteria, there'd be specialized criteria around this. They would need to, demonstrate a real need and a rationale for why. You wouldn't be able to waive everything, even at auto dealerships. There are appropriate places for trees.
Right.
We just saw 170 Main Dunstable, the Audi dealership. There's trees going in there in reasonable areas. So no, it's not a vehicle to get rid of all of your landscaping, but there would be some difficulty to hit our standards for a use like that. And so this gives them an opportunity to still get approval while not meeting full standard.
Would this mean they wouldn't have to come in front of a board to
They would.
request a waiver?
They'd be getting a CUP. So
Okay.
a slightly higher threshold,
Right.
but with clear standards around it that would be easy to articulate rationale.
I would 100% agree with a car dealership having some exemption, but my concern would be like if a Market Basket Plaza went in and they would say, hey, we can get more parking in if I don't have to have this median with trees in it and so on. And so I guess I like the idea of them having to come forward because then we can determine, are you different? If your criteria were very specific to types of business, obviously auto dealerships, as long as we're not completely getting rid of all, that's where I would have a concern is if we just kind of left it up. And while I think like present staff and so on would interpret it a particular way, I fear that in 20 years or 15 years, if staff changes come around, what is there going to be their interpretation? I mean, I just look at our legislator here in the city, the Board of Aldermen, or in the state, looking at past laws and rules and coming up with their own interpretation of it because it fits the need of this particular business. So,
I would just suggest, we fairly routinely waive some of these standards
Right.
now and get zero in return for it.
right,
So it seems to me this is an opportunity to say, okay, we're already granting this accommodation pretty frequently, but now there's a mechanism where we get something in return for it and
exactly.
can do something with those funds.
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, similar to what we do with the sidewalks and so on. And sometimes it's inappropriate to force them to put a
Yeah.
sidewalk where it's a sidewalk that goes nowhere in both directions. Let's use that money so we can possibly put sidewalks on Main Dunstable or some other, New Searles or someplace that really needs it
Same
for
idea.
safety and so on. So I don't have a problem with that fund. I think it's a great idea. As long as they still have to come in front of a board and,
Yeah, it
For
should
that
all be
determination.
handled as part of the site plan process.
yeah, the CUP, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sam, you might not have gone this far with it, but would it be similar to sidewalk in that it's sectionalized by quadrant, or would there be a greater city pot, I guess?
That's a good question. We haven't developed the policy that far, and I think that's a conversation to be had. So Stay tuned.
Yeah, I could almost understand the sidewalk being sectionalized.
Yes.
But landscaping, you could plant a tree anywhere. If you're collecting the funds, I would think that would make more.
And I think
But,
there are clear areas of the city where you're lacking in vegetation, where you have a lot in others. So, you know, if it needs to be an even distribution of trees in all 4 quadrants, well, maybe quadrant 2 like really needs the trees and quadrant 1 doesn't. So I think, yeah, we'll take that, we'll play with it.
yeah, other than that, big picture, I wouldn't have any issues with that. To Adam's point,
Right.
if we're already granting the waiver, we might as well get something for it.
Yeah.
So,
I agree, and I would like to see it be citywide, and I would like it to also, again, we're not here to dictate that, but in the conversation, the city already has a program that residents can get certain trees and so on from the city. Sometimes it's trees that they picked up, and they'll move them because it's just not appropriate in that area and so on. So I would love to see this become part of the residential program too, because there are a lot of residents that they move into a new place and they can get these trees at a very low cost and so
And
on.
this could be a source of money for that. So
Right.
rather than the residents having to pay for the tree
Right.
installation costs.
Yeah. This
it's
could help with the
provided by-
insulation, yeah.
But the
installation.
resident is saying, yes, plant it here on my frontage, you know? So we're getting, there's a public benefit. It's not just a tree that's going in someone's backyard, it's adding to the public realm.
And sometimes, such as like on Toll Street, they did that kind of tree bin where the residents got together, worked with the city, and they put in those low root, low type trees to help with traffic calming and so on. So, and that was not on anybody's particular property, but right in front there. So I think I'd like to see it all. This is great money that could come in and help those
Excellent.
type of things. So thank you.
Can I have one thing, Sam? In my day job today, I was dealing with some tree transplanting, and that was something that was requested on a site. And, you know, I don't know if that's a piece of the policy that you can incorporate as well. Maybe there are, you know, some really great mature trees that are on one part of the site, but that's right where the building's gonna go. You know, could there be anything written out to where, you know, a developer could, you know, put those trees in another part of the site where they're not touching?
Already in there.
Already in there, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Preservation of trees and the relocation, though, I would be very happy to see someone preserve and transplant a nice tree.
It's not always-
Won't hold my breath for it, though.
It's not always feasible, it's kind of a difficult thing to do,
Oh, yeah.
especially if the tree is really, really big. And sometimes they don't survive, so it's not a one-size-fits-all deal.
Yeah.
But, you know, it
But
should be
we do,
encouraged.
in our green score, which is like kind of how we're doing landscaping now, we do actually have a multiplier or a bonus, you know, for preserved trees, you know, existing, instead of like, think of anytime we see like a modern subdivision, the site is clear cut, right? But if you can actually save, I walk around a subdivision in my house that was done in the 80s, and there are 100-year-old trees through. It's like, wow, they didn't actually clear cut this subdivision. It looks really nice, rather than, you know, we walk through a normal one, and it's like, oh, the tree's like this tall, and the house has been here for a few years, and it's just too barren. So we want to incentivize that. 2 more, only 2 more. All right, so this one gets right to planning board. Technical Review Committee. We have one right now. It really only serves as an advisory capacity to planning board. But under statute, the planning board has the authority to delegate some site plan review to the TRC. So this gets into a threshold conversation, which is actually what the next slide is. But the idea that site plans of a certain size could be reviewed and approved by a collection of planning staff, engineering staff, fire, environmental health, all the departments that typically review development plans would then have approval authority if delegated that authority by the planning board. This is enshrined in statute, RSA 674-36 to be precise, if you want to go look it up. Cannot delegate subdivision authority. That is not in statute, so it would just be site plans. So if that is of interest, we can have a conversation about thresholds and review authority of, you know, at what level does development need to come to planning board for site plan? Right now, in terms of residential, it's 4 units or more. We have general admin review and approval authority for up to 10% change on site. So if there's a building addition that's 10% increase to the existing building footprint, doesn't have to go to site plan, it can be done administratively. Same if the unit count in a building increases by 10%. Really only happens when we have 100 units and they want to add 10, but if we've got a 5-unit building and you want to add a unit, site plan. So, some context, something to think about.
In some municipalities, Sam, at least one specifically comes to mind, they regularly utilize the TRC process. However, that body does not have approval authority. It's basically, here's all the department heads. We're going to make you come back every 2 weeks until we're all happy, and then it goes to planning board with the premise that it's already been so thoroughly vetted internally that obviously it doesn't preclude the board from, you're still under no obligation to approve, or you can certainly ask questions, but.
It's what we do now.
I
Here.
think-
Not as structured as like, come back every 2 weeks, but we're in constant contact with our applicants in making sure that we're bringing fully vetted plan sets to this board for review and approval. So the
Yeah.
question is, do you want to give us any approval authority at a certain threshold?
Yeah, I'd have to look at that a little bit more. I'm not aware of the specific provisions in law. I don't know. What's the tenor of the board on this one?
Just to be clear, but there are some instances now where you can approve things through administrative review, right? So that
Yes.
this is not unprecedented in terms of what you're talking about. It's just a question of basically, do we expand that?
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What's the threshold now, Sam, for what would be considered an administrative review versus what needs to go to full site plan or to a technical review?
Sure, so
What's the-
basically, 10% is the general admin. We get tons of admins, like changes of use, admin. It's a restaurant and wants to be a different restaurant or a retail use. That's usually an admin. We typically just check parking counts. If there's any major traffic impacts, we talk with engineering about that. But that's an admin approval. Triplexes, 3 units, we can admin that. But if it's 4 units or more, I think we could talk about that. We had an application on Greeley Street, so kind of down, like right by Artillery Lane, behind Amherst Street, closer to the Main Street side of Amherst Street. And it was a 4-unit building. They wanted to add a unit, and parking was constrained, so they never ended up doing it. But I'm sitting there, just like, wow, like, we're talking about adding 1 unit, and it is at the planning board for like 2 hours. Now, TRC can be utilized to the extent that they fully meet code. They don't need any waivers, they don't need any conditional use permits. Any of these discretionary approvals have to come back to the board. So if it's something that's really cut and dry and easy and saves the board a little bit of time, that would be an instance, but we have to determine if there's appetite to do that, where's the line?
Speaking of that specific one, there was a 2-hour conversation and so on, and the truth was that he wanted to put in a much larger unit, and there wasn't even adequate parking for what he had.
Exactly.
So taking that as an example, under this new criteria, my feeling is that even with the new state laws of 1 parking per unit, I don't think he would have even met that. But
So he wouldn't be able to get approval from TRC?
that's the question that I'm
because he doesn't meet
asking.
standard.
Right,
Yeah.
because that one was he was calling for hardship, saying that he had this extra space and so on, and wanted to kind of split it and so on, but that lack of parking was so extreme.
Yes.
And the location, there was no way of trying to even figure out parking. So something like that would have still come to this board, even though you said, wow, 2 hours. But that particular one would have probably still come to this board, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of, if it's, has to be totally conforming, no waiver request, I mean, that provides some protection in the sense that, we're sort of confining it within a box. I mean, I think it's hard to say, just sitting here, like, in the abstracts, like, what is the cutoff? So, I mean, I personally would probably have to think about it, and it'd probably be helpful to, like, have, like,
Examples.
does staff have, a proposal in terms of, like, what you guys think is, based on what you're seeing day in and day out, like,
Sure.
what are some metrics that you think we could use to help define what that threshold is? Because I agree with you, that example of like, is that really something that should be coming for a planning board? If it's an example where it's one unit, but it's fully conforming,
Yep.
no waiver requests, that seems to me like a prime example of where you
Yeah.
want to be able to use something like that.
What we could do is, we could pull a collection of recently approved site plans.
That's what I was gonna ask for.
Both the residential and the commercial flavor, to provide examples of stuff that we think might be on that bubble of like, it might be small enough. But then to give you a real example of say, hey, would you be okay giving staff the authority, or do you want to retain something here? And if the scale's a little less, does that tip the scale? So we could try and identify a few plans like that for you to chew on. But just want to introduce the idea, and you can think about it a little.
One more thought, and that was exactly what I was going to ask, but one more thought is, anytime something doesn't come to the board, that the additional conversation is that the butters aren't notified. And we're taking away their ability to speak about their concerns and so on. So I don't want to get to the point, because I can think of a number of things that have come here that we've just kind of, I won't never say rubber stamp, because we always listen and discuss and so on, but could have potentially gone through what you were talking about. But at the same time, were there residents that had come and spoke on those type of things? So that's my concern. I'm always concerned when we put laws through. And perfect example is the state doing the ADUs. It no longer comes to any board, and none of the abutters are notified, and suddenly there's this new apartment type or more right next door to them, and they never were able to speak about it. They never, that's the state's authority, not ours. But I hate taking the voice away from the people, so.
No, that's another thing of constraint that we would want to put. We wouldn't want to be necessarily reviewing and approving at the staff level things that really could trigger a lot of public concern, like 24 East Otterson.
Yes.
Would not be something that we would.
Right.
And any time the TRC has the ability to refer it to the planning board.
Okay.
Sam, would we still see those items show up on the tentative agendas, even if they're contemplated as administrative reviews? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
You would be aware of it.
And I can't recall, would this also apply to CUPs, or is so CUPs are always going to come here?
Site plan only.
Yep. All right.
All right. So just one final thought. I had mentioned it earlier. Because we're introducing form standards, and this is kind of a new thing, we are contemplating baking in some sort of temporary in terms of like, we've adopted the code. We want to have this provision effective for a period of time while we have the code out there. It's being tested in the development market, and we're getting real live feedback from real applicants about these standards. We do want to have some sort of waiver mechanism where any of the form standards can be modified, 10 to 20% off of that number that's in the standard, just so that we can keep track and we can see like, how close are these standards, and then come back after a period of time, if it's 6 months, a year, and then kind of do a blanket piece of legislation and say, all right, based on all of these applications we've had come in, we need to modify our standards accordingly. But that way, we're not sending someone to the ZBA because they want their building footprint a little bit bigger than what's in standard, so 10, 20%, maybe more, I'm not sure, just to create a level of flexibility. We already exercise this right now. We have the MU, the TOD, that allows full modification of all dimensional regulations, which is totally unbounded. There's no cap, so we lose the predictability for the abutters because the planning board now has essentially variance authority and beyond to regulate dimensional regulations. So it's just of that flavor, just slightly different and around a new thing that we're introducing.
So this would rein in the MUs and the TODs? They would have to fall within that?
MU and TOD is going away.
Oh, okay, that is going away.
But I'm just saying that I'm just kind of taking that flavor
As an
of
example, yeah.
authority of modification and we're just boiling it down just a little bit and applying it strictly to the form standards around all of our building types.
Right, but this would be across the board, everywhere.
No, but not like site standards, like
Right,
Really
just-
around
just
the
the form
form
standards.
standards, because that's an entirely new
Right.
concept that we're introducing, and we want to just have a little bit of wiggle room in case we missed.
And then beyond that percentage, they would then have to come to a board and ask for an exception or a variance or something to that, okay.
But again, all those form standards are based on patterns and surveys that were conducted in the field, on the ground, in Nashua. So we're thinking we got pretty close, but we want to have just a little bit of wiggle room.
Within each community, is there a different standard, or is it just a standard across the board as what was,
It'd be for all building types.
all
So
building types?
All
regard-
structures. which have
Regardless
form
of,
standards.
regardless of the community they'd be being
When
built
you say
into?
community, do you mean district?
Yeah, right, exactly, like district, and I always go to my own ward, but thinking of any of the wards, I mean, for someone to say, okay, well, this standard exists, I'm gonna put it here, but it doesn't fit within the community or flavor of the,
Yes.
and I'll use Concord Street or French Hill or Manchester Street or anything else like that. So if you have a building standard, they could just put it anywhere?
So.
Am I
certain-
conflating things? I'm sorry if I am.
Certain building types are
Yeah.
permitted in certain districts.
Districts, yes.
So the districts kind of are a reflection of the character that's on the ground.
Right.
And organizes those building types. So, not all building types are permitted everywhere.
Right.
They're governed by the districts.
I'm kind of like going back to the conversation that we had at the special Board of Aldermen meeting where you were showing the flat roof versus when we were talking about multi-type of things. If you did have those two standards, would they then be able to say, we want this big, this tall, flat roof one
No,
put over
so
there?
it's modifying the standards in those specific building types. So like, say they wanted to build an apartment house,
Right.
but it limits you to 34 feet wide, and they wanted, like, their plan was
Got it.
36 feet.
Got it.
No problem, you're within 20%.
Okay, okay.
Right, so that's what we're talking about.
And you wouldn't have had that, what's called a multi-unit one, right? The one that had the flat roof?
Multiplex, yeah.
Multiplex. That multiplex might not be allowed within that district.
Correct.
Got it. Thank
Yeah.
you. That makes sense.
Sam, just long-term, should the Board of Aldermen see fit to adopt this? Is it going to be official upon adoption, or is it January 1, 2027? Are you going to tie it to the fiscal year? Like, I think to pass this, like, tomorrow, hypothetically, and then say, it's in force on Monday, everybody,
No, good
get ready.
question. I should have included my scheduling slide, which I provided to PEDC. We have been targeting July 1 as effective date. That date is chosen because there are quite a few state laws that were passed in the past session, but also are contemplated now that go into effect July 1, and they're significant. And we're kind of planning around those in this code, so everything kind of just become effective all at the same time. It's clean. Obviously, it's not that far away. And so what that means is, we had a conversation with our consultants today of having to submit as legislation, like literally send it to Donna Graham and say, hey, put it on the agenda by May 1st. So it's not far away.
Yeah, we're slow moving, so.
But what May 1st allows is referral to multiple boards and committees. That begins the formal process. So we'd be doing a whole lot of this, what we're doing tonight. And if we get a lot of feedback, we recognize that it's going to push out the adoption time period. And
Do
that's
you
fine.
have to have public hearings on that kind of
Oh, yeah.
legislation? Yeah.
Mhm.
That is going to push it out.
Just one?
Usually, we just have to have one. Unless we make any changes to it, then we have to have another one.
Exactly.
So every time we have a public hearing and we make even the smallest of change to it, we have to announce 2 more weeks and then have another public hearing. And we can't then change it.
Which is why
Yeah.
I'm going to PEDC every month and probably going to some special meetings to have these conversations,
Yeah.
to air any issues and, so
Get
that
it out first.
when we do bring it to the formal process, it will go through the formal hearings, it will get referred to PEDC, it'll get referred to Planning Board, maybe others, BPW, I don't know. That's the board's option to refer it to others, but at least by submitting May 1st, there's 2 months of time through which to run through that process.
I know you've been talking to the PEDC, and you plan on continuing that, but because this is eventually going to go to the full board, can I make a strong recommendation that everything gets sent to all board members, all BOA members, and not just the PEDC? So ask Donna when she sends it, make sure all the board gets it. Because that has been the problem, is board members will come to the Board of Aldermen and saying, well, I'm just, because they didn't have the chance. It's not that they're not doing their homework, they're all hard workers. But they didn't get a chance to go to every single committee meeting and so on, because they have to work or something of that nature. So if they get the heads up of it, at least maybe helps them to ask questions of you and so on.
I'll do you one better, and I'm
Okay,
speaking with all of them, trying to set up times.
Good.
You know, one-on-one, let's go through it. What are your questions? I'm not going to send them a 300-page document and say, all right, can we vote on this next week?
does that violate right to know? Make sure it doesn't. Because you're
No.
technically holding a meeting, no?
No, because
It's
I'm
not
meeting with them
a
one-on-one,
quorum.
there's no quorum.
No, it does, because I just talked to the mayor about wanting to see a presentation that had been given to a couple of members, like the chair and so on. And he called me today and said, I can't share it with you, because if I share it with you, you're part of that committee and it'll make quorum. And I
I
was like,
mean, it's not a public meeting if there's not a quorum.
well, it is a quorum, because he already met with 3 other members, and if he met with me, that would make quorum.
That's not right.
Trust
I
me,
will,
that's,
I will
yeah,
consult with
just
our
check.
corporation
Yeah.
counsel
Yeah.
and make
Please
sure we do
do,
it
please
by the
do,
book.
yeah. And I know that we, even when we do these site walks and things like that,
Oh, yeah.
it's got to be announced to the public, because, you know. But quorum doesn't necessarily have to meet, so like if I were to call Alderman Morgan and speak to her about something, and then I call Alderman Tebow and speak to him, and Alderman Clemens and so on, the minute I hit 8 people, I have held a public meeting even if I didn't do it all at once, and that is right to know. I learned that up in the State House, and I've learned that here, so
Yep.
just be really cautious.
Yep.
Thank you.
I will. And that is, just future stuff that we would hope to talk about. Our approval criteria for site plan and subdivisions. Do you like them? Do you wish we included other things? Just something that we could talk about at a future date. We do plan to talk about inclusionary zoning in depth, so payment in lieu formulas, target AMIs, percentages. We've subcontracted with RKG. They did the housing study. They also did our original and current inclusionary zoning ordinance. They've had some time to reflect on that, update some numbers based on market conditions. So those numbers are still being fleshed out, but that would be a conversation to have. And then also area thresholds. So how many acres do you need to opt into an overlay? How much of that redevelopment needs to be dedicated civic space, not necessarily dedicated to the city, but, you know, open green space that's accessible to the public? What's that percentage? And then anything else that you would like to talk about, questions, shoot me an email and we can make it happen, and I can put some slides together about any topic you.
Are the AMIs considering dropping the low?
We are exploring 2 tiers, so,
Okay.
well, actually 3 tiers, 100% AMI, 80, and 60.
Right.
Those come in at different points and at different percentages and for different scales of development. Because we're recognizing the cost of those to the developer side. We're trying to assume a industry standard rate of return, and then we're seeing how those numbers all play out. We're doing a lot of pro forma testing on a lot of different styles and seeing where it breaks down, because we don't want to stymie development because we're asking for too much. But we want to meet the community benefits of generation of affordable housing.
Just what I hear from the public, and actually from some of my colleagues too, is the concern about too many people being able to do the in payment in lieu of, and are we just collecting this money and not creating any kind of housing for this? So I know, like with the NIMCO building, we said at least one has to be.
Oh, and they're providing 20%.
I know,
AMI,
but when we
but
talked to
lower.
them about it, we said you have to have at least one of very low income and so on. And I do know that they're doing what they're supposed to do, but and even the Mohawk Tannery, the apartments, yes, the condos, no. So I'm happy with that, because I feel like that they did meet somewhat of a standard. But then we have some others that are just 100% no.
Yep. We recognize the issue that buyout can pose, but the developments and the developers who don't want to do it simply because of their
Can't make
management
the
style
numbers, yeah.
or however, it needs to be an option, but they will have to pay a premium for
Okay.
that option.
Okay. Thank you.
More on that to come, and that's all I got.
Thank you for the presentation, Sam.
Very thorough.
Thank you,
You're
Sam.
welcome. Thank you.
And thank you, board members, for the lively discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to.
Sam didn't have
guest
to wear his
speak.
bulletproof vest, so he survived. But yes, Sam, again, thank you. All right. There's no last-minute questions for Sam. I think we'd be looking for a motion to adjourn. Anyone? Anyone?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make that motion to adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Zoller. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
None
We
of them
are,
wanted to leave.
we are adjourned at 9:46.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for letting me guest speak.
Certainly.
I was surprised.